The night sky was illuminated with a meteor shower, a breathtaking display that would leave anyone in awe if not for the dire circumstances on the ground. The area around Dongho Bridge was eerily desolate, a stark reminder that survival in this new world was not exclusive to humans. Monsters too were engaged in a relentless battle to protect their territories. Amid the ruins, Dokja moved swiftly into a convenience store. The shelves were in disarray, but he wasted no time. Grabbing several plastic bags, he swept in whatever food he could find. He worked quickly, knowing the dangers that lurked. A notification appeared in his vision that the Elaine Monkey's Lungs item was now in use. This was an item he had prepared beforehand, a life-saving artifact that acted as a temporary air purifier, allowing him to breathe in the highly contaminated environment for only 20 minutes. The system issued a warning. The scenario was marked as highly toxic, urging him to hold his breath and find shelter underground as soon as possible. Dokja muttered to himself, determined to move quickly. The effect of the Elaine Monkey's lungs was temporary. He had to find safety before it wore off. Just as he was about to leave, a faint sound reached his ears. It was a plea for help, weak and desperate, cutting through the stillness. He turned sharply, scanning the area, and his eyes landed on a woman crawling towards him. Her figure was frail, her movements sluggish, but her desperation was evident. She was alive, a rare sight in the chaos that surrounded him. Without hesitation, Dokja made a decision. He hoisted the trembling woman onto his back, her weight barely noticeable amidst the adrenaline coursing through him. Dokja sprinted with all his might, the woman clinging weakly to his back. The supplies rattled in the bags he carried, but he didn't stop. He ran through the ruins, his mind racing as he assessed the situation. He realized Oksu Station had been destroyed because it was above ground, leaving it vulnerable. The closest underground station to his current location was Gyeomho Station. Without slowing down, he adjusted his route and pushed forward. As he reached Gyeomho Station, he was met with frustration. The entrance was blocked, the shutters firmly closed. He quickly glanced around for alternatives, his thoughts scrambling for a solution. That's when the woman on his back weakly spoke, her voice barely audible but clear enough to guide him. Exit 4. Following her directions, Dokja carried her toward the indicated exit. However, as they approached, he noticed two men hastily closing the shutters of the space. Just as the shutters slammed shut, loud banging erupted from the other side, startling the men. It wasn't just the monsters outside, it was Dokja, determined to get in. Inside, the men hesitated, fear and desperation written on their faces. They refused to open the shutters, claiming the space was overcrowded and couldn't accommodate any more people. But Dokja wasn't deterred. The safety of the injured woman on his back took precedence over their excuses. Their refusal struck him as odd. Overcrowding in this station hadn't been mentioned in 3 ways to survive the apocalypse. Something about this scenario was different, but there was no time to dwell on it. Determined, Dokja grabbed a sharp thorn, an item he had prepared in advance, and inserted it into the bottom of the shutter. With a swift and powerful motion, he forced it open. The men inside froze in shock, their disbelief quickly turning into panic. Without another word, they fled, disappearing into the shadows of the station. A notification flashed in Dokja's vision, confirming that he had entered a safety zone. The environment around him immediately felt less oppressive, but his attention remained on the woman. She was still weak, her condition worsening from the contaminated air. Reaching into his supplies, Dokja retrieved the Elaine Monkey's lungs. He carefully handed it to her, instructing her to use it. Though it wouldn't heal her completely, it would neutralize the poison in her system, giving her a chance to recover. Dokja's thoughts wandered as he carried the injured woman. He questioned her identity, wondering if such a character had existed in 3 ways to survive the apocalypse. It was likely she never survived this far in the novel. His curiosity pushed him to consider checking her character profile, but his musings were abruptly interrupted by a loud commotion. Voices echoed through the station, growing louder as a group approached. The men who had fled earlier had returned, but this time with reinforcements, armed with weapons like bats. Their intentions were clear. At the front of the group, their leader stepped forward, exuding hostility. His voice was sharp and demanding as he questioned Dokja's presence. A notification appeared in Dokja's vision, alerting him to the displeasure of a constellation observing the situation. The prisoner of the golden headband was frowning at the turn of events. Unbothered, Dokja identified himself calmly, but his response only seemed to aggravate the leader further. It became apparent that the leader wasn't interested in his name, but rather his purpose and identity. The tension escalated as the group's attention shifted to the woman Dokja was carrying. Their surprise was evident, and murmurs spread among them. Recognition dawned on their faces as they connected her to a minor group they knew. She had supposedly been with others who were part of their faction, yet she had reappeared with Dokja instead. The leader's eyes narrowed, and his expression twisted into a cunning smirk as he turned to one of his subordinates. The truth behind her appearance started to unravel. He accused his subordinates of acting without his permission. mission. One of them tried to excuse himself with a weak grin, suggesting Cholsu should have been involved first. In his mind, Dokja reflected on the stereotypical villains often portrayed in post-apocalyptic stories. Cholsu, an unfamiliar name, seemed insignificant in the grander narrative. To Dokja, the concept of lawlessness in such worlds often felt cliché, yet reality had proven that humans could be far worse than the stories implied. The group's focus shifted to the supplies Dokja carried. Greed flashed in their eyes as they demanded the woman and the food. Cholsu, grinning wickedly, attempted to assert his authority, offering Dokja a chance to leave if he surrendered everything. Notifications suddenly filled Dokja's vision, reflecting the discontent of observing constellations. One was enraged by the group's injustice, while another demanded retribution. A new scenario was triggered, a bounty hunter scenario, setting the stage for confrontation. Dokja felt the tension in the air but remained composed. In his mind, he acknowledged the inevitable outcome, not for him, but for the group in front of him. Cholsu, trying to intimidate him, smashed his knuckle-braced fists together, promising violence if Dokja didn't comply. Before Cholsu could finish his countdown, Dokja moved first, landing a swift and powerful punch to his cheek. The impact sent Cholsu flying out of sight, crashing into the wall with a loud thud. The group was stunned, their leader incapacitated in an instant. Their disbelief was evident as they hesitated, questioning how Dokja could remain unfazed and still standing after the blows he had taken. Some began to suspect that he might have a supporting constellation aiding him. As the group tried to retaliate, they found themselves overwhelmed. Dokja's strikes were calculated, aimed precisely at their legs, leaving them bruised and unable to move effectively. The difference in strength was apparent. Dokja reflected on the importance of stats like strength, agility, and stamina in determining the outcome of a battle. His combined stat total of 33 far outmatched theirs, which were mostly in the single digits. Even with a supporting constellation, their low stats made them no match for him. Stepping closer, Dokja accessed Cholsu's character profile and discovered that he was backed by a constellation called the Monarch of the Small Fries. The revelation amused Dokja. Of all the possible supporters, Cholsu had one with little influence. In his thoughts, Dokja recalled that Cholsu had been a minor character in TWSA, meant to die early at the hands of Junghyuk, yet here he was, alive and causing trouble. Cholsu, battered but still defiant, smirked as he spoke to Dokja. He claimed to recognize a similarity between them, insinuating that Dokja had likely killed others to survive. Dokja's mind briefly wandered, flashing back to his encounter with Namwoon Kim. The memory stirred a pang of regret. He wondered if, back then, he might have saved others. The haunting words from that time echoed in his thoughts. A sudden notification brought him back to the present. The system informed him that the fourth wall had blocked Cholsu's attempt at bluffing. Snapping out of his reflection, Dokja acted swiftly. He stabbed Cholsu's hand with a thorn. Cholsu screamed in agony, his confidence now shattered. The system announced a reward from Cholsu's supporting constellation. Amused by the events, it gifted Dokja 100 coins. Dokja processed the information, recognizing the irony. The Monarch of the Small Fries was infamous, not for aiding its incarnations, but for taking pleasure in their misery. Its support meant little, as it delighted in seeing its chosen suffer at the hands of others. With only 2 minutes left before the scenario ended, Dokja unleashed a merciless assault on Cholsu. Each blow was calculated, each strike a reminder of the pain Cholsu had caused. Cholsu's group, witnessing their leader's humiliation, begged Dokja to stop, pleading for his mercy. As the fight came to an end, Dokja turned his gaze to the woman who had been a victim of Cholsu and his gang. Her pain mirrored that of the old woman in the cabin from earlier, a cruel reminder of the darkness lurking in humanity. Dokja's mind raced with conflicting thoughts as he stood over Cholsu. Humans are weak, he reflected, but how can they be so cold-blooded and cruel? The apocalypse seemed like an excuse for their actions, but deep down, Dokja wondered if such cruelty was ingrained in human nature. Grabbing Cholsu by the collar, he demanded an answer, but Cholsu's response was bitter and defiant. He cursed the world and urged Dokja to end it all. For a moment, Dokja saw the despair in Cholsu's eyes, a reflection of something that had existed even before the world collapsed. In that despair, Dokja saw a part of himself, realizing that perhaps they weren't so different after all. With only 10 seconds left before the scenario ended, Dokja made his decision. He raised his foot and brought it down with finality, ending Cholsu's life in an instant. The group that had once followed Cholsu screamed in shock and horror, accusing Dokja of being cold-blooded. But Dokja remained resolute, his thoughts clear. The world has ended, and I have to adapt to this new reality. He picked up the injured woman and carried her on his back, turning to Cholsu's group with a calm command. They reluctantly agreed to lead him to the rest of the survivors. Gumho Station, a place destined destined to become the region's stronghold, loomed in the distance. As Dokja followed the group, the station came into view, bustling with survivors. Murmurs rippled through the crowd as they noticed the Cholsu gang returning. People pointed and whispered, asking for help as they saw the injured woman on Dokja's back. Among the crowd, familiar voices broke through the noise. Yu Senga's voice trembled with relief as she called out to Dokja. Beside her, Lee Gilyong sprinted to Dokja, throwing his arms around him in an emotional embrace. The boy clung tightly. Senga couldn't contain her emotions, expressing her disbelief that Dokja was okay. Behind her, Lee Hyunsong approached. He apologized profusely for leaving Dokja behind. Dokja, however, reassured him with a calm demeanor, accepting his actions as necessary in the face of the chaos. Hyunsong mentioned Junghyuk's prediction. He explained that Junghyuk had confidently stated that Dokja was likely still alive. This comment piqued Dokja's curiosity, and he asked about Junghyuk's whereabouts. Hyunsong revealed that Junghyuk had left the station the previous day, heading off to pursue his own goals. Dokja's thoughts began piecing together the situation. Junghyuk, the regressor who relived his life repeatedly, was now in his third round. In this iteration, he had become a relentless and calculating individual, intent on monopolizing power and resources to achieve his ultimate goal. Dokja realized that the survival of the Cholsu gang was unusual. According to the events in 3 ways, to survive the apocalypse, they should have been killed by Junghyuk. However, it seemed Junghyuk had left the station in a hurry, leaving loose ends, a rare occurrence for someone as thorough as him. Hyunsong, puzzled, asked what he meant, but Dokja dismissed it as a habit of talking to himself. Before they could continue their discussion, a loud voice cut through the murmur of the crowd. Han Myungo stepped forward, his tone filled with anger and disdain. He pointed at Dokja, accusing him of being dangerous and unfit to remain with the survivors. Han's accusations caused a stir, and several individuals armed with makeshift weapons began to surround Dokja, their hostility apparent. Han, his frustration boiling over, demanded that Dokja be removed from the station. He labeled Dokja as evil and untrustworthy, his voice filled with righteous indignation. The tension was palpable as the crowd hesitated, unsure of how to proceed. Just then, another voice broke through the commotion. Calm yet commanding, it belonged to Inho Cheon, a man who exuded authority and charisma. He stepped forward, placing a firm hand on Han's shoulder to steady him. With a disarming smile, Inho addressed Han, urging him to remain calm and rational. Turning his attention to Dokja, Inho introduced himself with a polite yet calculated demeanor. His tone was friendly, but there was an underlying sense of control in his words as he asked for Dokja's name. Dokja's mind worked quickly, recalling details from the novel. The name Inho Cheon wasn't unfamiliar. He knew that Inho had a supporting constellation and was likely the leader of this group. The Cholsu gang, now under Inho's command, had likely reported the earlier incident to him. Dokja realized that Inho was a man who would not let such actions go unaddressed. Dokja, preparing for the inevitable, squeezed the thorn in his hand, steeling himself for what was to come. Inho broke the tension by addressing Dokja with a surprising announcement. He mentioned that the people who had come with Dokja spoke of his bravery, how he had fought the monsters and saved Inho's men. This caught Dokja off guard. It seemed that Inho had already heard about his actions, and rather than confront him aggressively, Inho turned it into an opportunity. Inho called for everyone's attention, directing the group to gather around. He announced that this new member, Dokja Kim, had brought food for them. The atmosphere shifted as the survivors around them broke into excited chatter, murmuring about the food they would get to eat. The desperation and relief were palpable. Inho's chuckle filled the air. Dokja, still trying to process the rapid shift, a message blinked in his vision. It came from the constellation Secretive Plotter, whose excitement was apparent in the notification. With his group, Dokja moved to the other side of the area, trying to make sense of everything unfolding around him. Hyunsong gave him a brief overview of the station's population. There were 86 people at Gumho Station, 87 including Dokja. It was fewer than Dokja had expected. Hyunsong continued, explaining that only those who had been in the cabin and near the station had survived the initial onslaught. He hesitated before mentioning that everyone here had cleared the first scenario. Dokja silently observed his surroundings with a grim realization. Everyone here had survived by killing others. Every single person was a murderer in their own way. Hyunsong spoke calmly, providing insight into the fractured dynamics of the station. He explained how the survivors had split into 2 factions, the major group holding most of the power, and the minor group struggling to maintain their dignity. In the distance, Han was addressing a group of people, his voice filled with false confidence. He shouted that they just needed to trust him, assuring everyone that the chairman was doing his best and that rescue was imminent. Nearby, others added to the illusion of hope. Someone praised Han, calling him the young master of the Hangyang Corporation. corporation. A child's soft voice broke through the chaos as he told his mother he was hungry. The mother, holding back tears, reassured him that they would be rescued soon. Inho, ever the opportunist, stood tall and confident, echoing similar sentiments. He reminded everyone that the government would intervene and ensure their safety. Dokja silently observed, his thoughts cutting through the veneer of optimism. Even when 100 murderers gathered, they instinctively divided themselves into the strong and the weak. This was the essence of human nature. Did everyone truly believe there was no other way to survive? Inho continued, explaining the grim reality of their food situation. The major group controlled the distribution of rations, but supplies were running dangerously low. In an attempt to manage resources, they had started assigning people to scavenge for food outside the station. Among those tasked with this dangerous mission was He-1, the woman Dokja had saved earlier. Senga, standing beside him, quietly clarified her identity. She mentioned that a few others had also been sent out, but none of them, those from the minor group, had returned. Dokja turned his attention to Hyunsong, his calm demeanor masking his curiosity. He acknowledged Hyunsong's decision to stay with the minor group instead of aligning with the more powerful major group. Hyunsong responded with a quiet honesty. He admitted that while the major group had likely wanted him, he had chosen to remain with the minor group. He wasn't sure if it was about morality or ethics, but something about the major group's approach felt wrong. Even so, he couldn't ignore the hypocrisy in his own actions. Worrying about right and wrong seemed almost laughable after everything that had happened. Dokja placed his hand on Hyunsong's chest, a subtle yet firm gesture. He emphasized the importance of worrying about right and wrong, even as a hypocrite, urging Hyunsong not to forget it. Hyunsong's eyes welled up, his emotions raw, but he managed to hold back his tears. Dokja's thoughts lingered on the situation. Just because the circumstances were unavoidable didn't mean the actions taken could be ignored. The events that transpired could never be justified, and they must never be forgotten. Inho approached, flanked by members of the major group. He directly asked Dokja to join their group, offering him a high position and suggesting they could lead the survivors together. Dokja silently processed Inho's proposition. He understood the intent behind the words. Inho wasn't offering help, he was seeking to use him. Inho continued, justifying his offer as cooperation for the survival of everyone at the station. He pointed to the suffering around them, appealing to Dokja's sense of responsibility as someone with power. Dokja declined without hesitation, leaving Inho to retreat with a confident parting remark, suggesting Dokja could reconsider and find him if he changed his mind. Hyunsong questioned Dokja's decision, his mind replaying Inho's last words. Dokja responded with a smirk, dismissing the idea of ever reconsidering the offer. Yet, he acknowledged the uncertainty of the situation, knowing things could change in unexpected ways. Dokja glanced at Hyunsong, agreed with the sentiment, stating they would see what happened next. Shifting focus, he mentioned it was time for dinner and handed out food to the others. Gilyong's face lit up with excitement as he asked if they could really eat it. Just as the atmosphere started to ease, a loud voice echoed across the station, disrupting the moment. A group of people approached, their expressions filled with anger and frustration. They began to accuse Dokja, claiming he was hoarding food for himself while others went hungry. The accusations grew louder, with the group questioning why he would monopolize the food that others had helped collect. Some demanded that Inho take charge of the food distribution, arguing it would be fair for everyone to get their share. Dokja froze for a moment, stunned by the sudden hostility. He quickly realized what was happening. In his mind, he identified the true danger in this apocalyptic world. It wasn't individuals driven by despair, like Chol Su-bang. No, the real threat came from those who thrived on the despair of others, using it to cultivate their own power. His thoughts sharpened as he recognized the man behind this manipulation. Inho Cheon, the self-proclaimed leader of the major group, was orchestrating the crowd's anger. This was a calculated move, one designed to corner Dokja into submission. The accusations continued, each word building pressure. Inho stood among the crowd. He presented Dokja with a false choice: become a hero by sharing the food, or a villain by keeping it for himself. Dokja's frustration boiled over, his teeth clenched in anger. Inho's name echoed in his mind as he grappled with the manipulation. Just then, a notification flickered in Dokja's vision, signaling that he had entered the second scenario area. The message urged him to find and move to the location where the scenario would activate. The protests from the crowd didn't stop. They demanded Inho take control of the food and redistribute it fairly. The pressure mounted as their voices grew louder. Meanwhile, a small grin formed on his face. For him, this was all part of the plan. He knew exactly how to manipulate these people and force Dokja into compliance. Inho stepped forward, raising his hands to calm the angry crowd. He spoke with an air of authority, assuring them that there had been a misunderstanding. He claimed that Dokja had already agreed to join their group and that the food would be collected and redistributed as usual. Inho's expression remained calm, but inside he was confident in his ability to control the situation. He believed Dokja would have no choice but to play along. Inho continued, adding that Dokja had also promised to cooperate with their group moving forward. Dokja, however, interrupted. He announced that he would share the food, but it wouldn't be free. The crowd murmured in confusion and disbelief, questioning what he meant. Some speculated he intended to sell the food, their voices laced with suspicion. A notification appeared in Dokja's vision. The eyes of a few constellations sparkled with excitement, while the constellation's secretive plotter scoffed in amusement. Dokja confirmed their suspicions, stating he wasn't running a charity and didn't trust everyone blindly. Inho's frustration showed for a brief moment, his grin tightening as he struggled to maintain his composure. The murmurs grew louder as the crowd began to ask how much the food would cost. Some even suggested paying with money, desperate to strike a deal. Dokja dismissed the idea of currency, declaring he would only accept coins as payment. The crowd grew uneasy, some questioning whether this was a good idea. Dokja remained firm, setting the price at 10 coins per food item from that moment onward. A notification flickered in his vision, revealing that a few constellations were relieved by his decision and had gifted him 100 coins. He-One stepped forward, her voice steady and resolute. She agreed with Dokja's terms, stating that it was only fair. Without hesitation, she offered to pay immediately, refusing to accept free food. She introduced herself as Jung Hee-Won and thanked Dokja for helping her earlier. Dokja extended his hand and shook hers, acknowledging her gratitude. Hee-Won addressed Sanga and Hyunsung directly, urging them to regain their composure. She reminded them that Dokja had risked his own life to retrieve the food, and criticized them for even considering acting like the others who expected to leech off him. Her words struck a chord. Sanga, flustered, quickly apologized. She admitted she wasn't thinking clearly, and insisted she didn't want any handouts. Hyunsung followed suit, promising to pay immediately. Dokja agreed, asking if they knew how to trade coins. Sanga confirmed she had learned a few days ago, and explained the process, touching index fingers and thinking about the amount to exchange. A notification appeared as Gil-young transferred 20 coins to Dokja. Surprised, Dokja asked why the boy had sent 10 extra coins. Gil-young explained it was for the chocolate from earlier that morning. Hee-Won remarked how Gil-young seemed more honorable than the shameless adults around them. She then shifted her focus to the major group, pointing out their hypocrisy. They were monopolizing food, feeding others just enough to keep them alive, and then sending them off as scavengers, like disposable cattle. Hee-Won mentioned her own experience from earlier that day, highlighting the grim reality. Hyunsung agreed with her, acknowledging the significance of Dokja's decision to sell food. However, he questioned whether the high price of 10 coins per item would attract any buyers. Dokja remained calm, saying they would wait and see. Hyunsung suggested Dokja should rest while he kept watch, but Dokja declined. He mentioned having other matters to take care of, which piqued Hyunsung's curiosity. Suddenly, Hee-Won exclaimed in frustration. She realized that all the food had been sold overnight, and cursed the two-faced nature of the others. Dokja observed her, noting that she wasn't as fragile as she initially seemed. But it wasn't just the minor group that had secretly bought food during the night. The next morning, Inho addressed the gathered crowd. He announced a new rule. Food distribution would now be limited to 3 biscuits per person. The people erupted in murmurs of disbelief and outrage. They questioned how they were supposed to survive on such a small amount and called out the unfairness, pointing out that the search party received much more food. Inho didn't attempt to deny the accusations. Instead, he addressed the crowd with calculated calm, stating that anyone was welcome to join the search party if they wanted more food. The response was immediate and loud. People voiced their frustrations, pointing out that almost no one who joined the search party returned alive except for members of the Chulsu gang. They accused him of practically sending them to their deaths. Inho's demeanor remained unbothered as he suggested an alternative. If they were unwilling to join the search party, they could always scavenge for food themselves. His tone carried an edge, forcing the crowd into silence. Inho then shifted his strategy, his smile widening as he addressed the group with mock humility, claiming there was another way to gain more food without risking their lives. He mentioned that he had learned a valuable lesson from Dokja the previous day. Dokja, watching from a distance, thought to himself about the irony. It had been the major group that bought over half the food he had scavenged, though they had paid for it in full. Dokja's memory shifted to the interaction with Inho, recalling the man's warning. Inho had confidently stated that Dokja was digging his own grave and would regret his actions. Now, as Inho addressed the crowd, his words carried a malicious undertone. He explained that nothing in the world could be free, and that everyone had to prove their worth to eat. He announced that the major group would exchange food for anything they deemed valuable, presenting it as the natural order of the world. With a sinister smile, he credited Dokja for teaching them this lesson, placing all the blame for the new rules squarely on Dokja's shoulders. As Inho spoke, a notification notification appeared in Dokja's vision, revealing that Inho had activated the skill in sight. Everything made sense now. The irrational behavior of the people wasn't just due to desperation, it was Inho's skill manipulating their emotions and actions. He-Won, standing nearby, spoke up, her frustration evident. She pointed out that the major group was still monopolizing food, directly opposing Dokja's goal of encouraging people to trade and weaken the group's control. Dokja acknowledged her insight silently, recognizing her sharp understanding of the situation. He-Won, however, wasn't done. She criticized Dokja for selling food to the major group, arguing that nothing had changed. Dokja, unfazed, responded calmly, knowing the truth. The situation had changed. He had earned more coins. As he reviewed his gains, a notification displayed the exact number, 1,450 coins. He-Won's surprise was evident as she demanded to know his plan. Turning to Senga, she sought reassurance, asking if Dokja could truly be trusted. Senga chuckled softly, her response showing quiet confidence. He-Won pressed further, asking if Dokja had kept any food for himself. Dokja's reply was straightforward. He had sold it all. He-Won's disbelief grew, her bewildered expression reflecting her unease. Gil Young, standing nearby, poked Dokja gently and offered him his own food. Dokja shook his head, declining the offer with a faint smile, telling the boy to keep it. He then turned his attention to the others and made an unexpected announcement. He recommended that everyone who had purchased food the previous day should finish it by the end of that day. His tone was firm, leaving no room for argument. Meanwhile, protests erupted on the other side of the station. The people, frustrated and desperate, were arguing with members of the major group. The major group had raised the price of food to 200 coins each, an amount far beyond the reach of most. The protesters shouted in anger, insisting they couldn't afford such exorbitant prices. The response from the major group was cold and dismissive, ordering them to leave if they couldn't pay. Moments later, Dokja stood alone on the station tracks, his posture steady and purposeful. He-Won, watching him, voiced her concern. She reminded him that everyone who had ventured in that direction had died, whether they were gangsters or not. Her words carried a warning, but Dokja's focus remained unchanged. Before leaving, He-Won spoke again, her tone softening. She expressed her gratitude once more, thanking Dokja for saving her life the previous day. Dokja acknowledged her thanks, his reply calm and measured. As He-Won shifted her gaze, her expression darkened and she pointed toward a man walking with a limp. Her voice hardened as she revealed his identity. He was the one who had tried to harm her, the source of her pain and anger. She made it clear to Dokja that the man was hers to deal with. Dokja observed He-Won silently and reflected on her situation. She was someone who would have already met a grim fate if not for his intervention. He knew she was the kind of person who would attract the attention of constellations. Curious, Dokja decided to check her character profile. His suspicions were confirmed. 3 constellations were currently showing interest in her. Before Dokja could ponder further, He-Won's sharp gaze caught something in the distance. Without hesitation, she bolted towards the scene, her urgency drawing his attention. She shouted in alarm, pointing out that the major group had taken the women and the elderly. Her voice was filled with anger and concern as she processed the injustice. Dokja stepped forward, asking what He-Won planned to do. Her response was immediate and determined. She intended to stop them. She couldn't stand by and watch them join the search party, knowing they wouldn't survive. Dokja's response, however, was more practical. He reminded her that staying behind wasn't a solution either. If they remained, they would only starve to death. He-Won's frustration was evident, but Dokja's mind was elsewhere. He had just discovered her personal attribute, crouching figure. It seemed unremarkable at first glance, but Dokja knew better. This attribute, while seemingly common, had immense potential. In TWSA, it was known as a rare super evolutionary attribute capable of transforming into something extraordinary. He recalled that one of the top 100 incarnations in the story, the Berserk Butcher, had also started with this same attribute. He-Won wasn't satisfied with Dokja's response. Her frustration boiled over as she asked if he expected her to just stand by and do nothing. Dokja, however, remained composed. He told her that stopping them now wouldn't change the underlying problem. The food shortage was the root cause, and unless that was addressed, the same situation would repeat itself over and over again. As He-Won processed his words, Dokja's thoughts deepened. Initially, he had considered her to be just another extra in the grand scheme of things, but now he was beginning to see her true potential. She wasn't just anyone, she was someone worth having as a companion. However, one detail about her profile lingered in his mind. Along with the crouching figure attribute, she also possessed the demon slaying skill. This combination, while powerful, carried a dangerous implication. If left unchecked, He-Won could evolve into an indiscriminate killer, blinded by rage and vengeance. Dokja turned to He-Won and pointed out that the root of the current problem lay in the scarcity of food. food. Hee-won agreed hesitantly, but her confusion grew when Dokja suggested eliminating the root of the issue altogether. He glanced at his phone, noting the timing, and prepared for what was about to happen. Suddenly, a blinding flash erupted and a dokkaebi appeared in front of the gathered survivors. Panic spread quickly through the crowd as they screamed in fear at the sudden presence. The dokkaebi stammered awkwardly, explaining that the one previously in charge of the scenario, Byung, was currently being disciplined. It introduced itself as the new overseer of the scenario, though it was clearly unsettled. Dokja immediately realized this dokkaebi was not Byung. Unlike the one he was familiar with, this one exuded a chaotic, unpolished demeanor. As the dokkaebi looked around, it seemed irritated by the calmness of the people, and blamed Byung for the state of the scenario. Then, with a snap of its fingers, the dokkaebi unleashed a new penalty. A flurry of notifications filled everyone's vision, stating that food could no longer be stockpiled and all existing food supplies would be removed. The people watched in horror as their remaining food floated into the air, leaving them helpless. The dokkaebi mocked them cruelly, calling them worthless and lazy for not working harder to complete the scenario. Its disdain for the survivors was evident, and with another snap of its fingers, all the food vanished entirely. The crowd erupted into frantic murmurs and cries of despair. Meanwhile, the dokkaebi gleefully announced the start of a new stage in the scenario, adding that it was time for things to get more exciting. A new message window appeared in everyone's vision, confirming the transition to the second scenario. Dokja observed the unfolding chaos with a faint smile. This situation, though dire, felt more aligned with what he knew from 3 Ways to Survive in an Apocalypse. The notification confirmed the details that they had entered the area of the second scenario, and the next task was to find and move to the location where it would be activated. Inho gathered the survivors and announced a critical decision. He declared that due to the current circumstances, only those who joined the search party would be provided with food. His words sent murmurs rippling through the crowd, their uncertainty and concern palpable. Dokja watched the scene unfold. He hadn't anticipated this additional penalty on top of the food restrictions. He speculated whether Inho might have foreseen it, but quickly dismissed the idea. Inho's actions were likely rooted in suspicion, but he couldn't confirm that Dokja knew about the penalty beforehand. Hee-won turned to Dokja, questioning if he had predicted this situation. Dokja admitted that he had considered what measures the dokkaebi might take to make survival harder. As he reviewed the notifications, Dokja realized the survival penalty wasn't part of the original novel, 3 Ways to Survive in the Apocalypse. He wondered if his contract with Byung had somehow altered the story. Lee Hyun-sung, clearly uneasy, sought Dokja's guidance. Dokja firmly decided against joining the search party, explaining that going above ground was too dangerous, even for food. Instead, he proposed finding an alternative food source. When Hyun-sung looked confused, Dokja hinted at his plan to hunt monsters, something Hyun-sung pieced together by examining the map. He realized Dokja's intention was to follow the rails. Inho, observing from a distance, called out to Dokja with a faintly mocking tone, acknowledging his intention to form a separate team to complete the scenario. Dokja felt a wave of irritation at Inho's behavior. He noted that Inho's response wasn't as confrontational as expected. Instead of lashing out for not joining the search party, Inho seemed content to let Dokja operate independently. As Dokja analyzed the situation, he recognized an intriguing pattern. Each time he earned a character's trust, made a favorable impression, or correctly guessed their thoughts, his understanding of them deepened. This increased understanding now allowed him to sense Inho's suspicions. A notification confirmed this, revealing that Inho Cheon was wary of Dokja's intentions. Inho approached Dokja with another request, revealing his true intentions. He asked if a member of his group could join Dokja's party, and also inquired about the method to clear the scenario. Dokja, already anticipating such a move, wasn't surprised. He knew Inho wouldn't let them go so easily without keeping an eye on them. As the group moved into the tunnel, Han Myung-go's voice rang out in fear. He noticed corpses scattered along the path and frantically tried to reassure Senga, but it was clear he was more terrified than she was. Senga remained calm, pointing out his fear, but Han Myung-go denied it in an attempt to save face. Lee Hyun-sung, ever cautious, asked Dokja if allowing Inho's member to join was wise. Dokja reassured him that the new addition posed no threat. Hyun-sung then shifted his concern to Hee-won, reminding her that she hadn't fully recovered. However, Hee-won brushed off his concern, stating that Gil-young needed more care than she did. Lee Senga voiced her worries about the dangers ahead, wondering if they were simply charging into the unknown. Hyun-sung agreed, suggesting that Gil-young and the women should return to safety. Hee-won, however, firmly responded, reminding Hyun-sung of her her capabilities. She revealed her experience in kendo, emphasizing that she wasn't as defenseless as he might assume. Despite this, Hyunsung remained hesitant. Dokja, observing the discussion, decided to intervene. He reminded everyone that the world they knew had changed, and old prejudices like associating weakness with women and children were no longer valid. He explained that anyone could grow stronger by increasing their stats. To demonstrate, he turned to Lee Gil-yong and asked him to showcase his abilities. Gil-yong nodded and moved to the tunnel floor. Extending his hand, he connected with a cockroach in the distance using a faint, solid line. The insect responded to Gil-yong's control, disappearing into the darkness. After a moment, Gil-yong shared the information he received. The path ahead was clear for about 100 steps. Hee-won, amazed by Gil-yong's abilities, couldn't hide her surprise. Han Myung-go, on the other hand, was horrified at the sight of the cockroach, cursing under his breath. Gil-yong calmly introduced his attribute, Bug Collector, explaining that it allowed him to communicate with insects. With quiet determination, he assured the group that he had no intention of being a burden and had joined them to contribute meaningfully. He won, momentarily surprised by Lee Gil-yong's confidence and unique ability, nodded in acknowledgement, recognizing his value to the group. Gil-yong added another observation, pointing out that the corpses scattered around were not just human, but also of something else entirely. The group noticed that the path ahead appeared ominously dark, almost as if a wall of shadows blocked their way. A sudden notification appeared before their eyes, announcing a new sub-scenario titled Hunting for Food. The tension thickened as Han Myung-go stumbled across a monstrous corpse, recoiling in fear. Hye-won, more composed, questioned how such a beast could have been killed. Dokja silently examined the scene, identifying the creature as a Tier 9 subterranean ground rat. He recalled their nature from the story he knew. They were pack hunters, highly persistent and dangerous in confined spaces like these tunnels. He was certain that only one person could have handled such monsters, Jung-hyuk. Hyunsung suggested that the remains might suffice to clear the scenario, but Dokja quickly dismissed the idea, explaining that they were required to hunt actively, not merely scavenge. Hyunsung then wondered how they were supposed to cook the meat, musing about the primitive conditions. Dokja, however, had other priorities. He turned to Hee-won, referencing her kendo experience, and handed her a task to assist with the weapons. Without hesitation, Dokja began tearing apart the carcass of the ground rat, methodically removing its spine to create makeshift weapons. Hee-won watched, half impressed and half amused, remarking that their situation felt like a step back to the Stone Age. Soon, each member of the group held a crude weapon fashioned from the monster's remains. Realizing their weapons needed refining, Dokja instructed the group to sharpen their tools on nearby rocks. His precision and guidance stemmed from his prior knowledge of the world in TWSA, which had dedicated chapters on the art of survival, including butchering monsters for tools. Hee-won, observing Dokja's resourcefulness, acknowledged his unexpected competence. Finally, Dokja reminded everyone to invest their remaining coins wisely. He emphasized the importance of enhancing their strength, stamina, and agility while reserving enough for the survival fee. His words were blunt and pragmatic, acknowledging the grim reality that not all of them might survive the trials ahead. Yet he urged them to fight for their survival with everything they had. With their preparations complete, the group resumed their journey through the dark tunnel. The ground rats, drawn by the presence of intruders, crawled closer, their low growls echoing ominously. Without hesitation, the group charged forward, weapons raised. Hyunsung drove his makeshift weapon deep into the body of the ground rat. The creature's blood sprayed out, painting the tunnel walls in crimson, but the attack provoked the rest of the pack. Several rats turned on Hyunsung, their sharp teeth bared. Before they could reach him, Hee-won intercepted, her movement sharp and precise. She managed to take down one of the rats with a clean strike, but another evaded her assault, disappearing into the darkness. Frustrated, she shouted her failure to the group. Gil-yong stepped forward, his confidence unshaken. Wielding his weapon with precision, he brought it down on another rat, the heavy thud signaling its end. Beside him, Sanga panted heavily as she stabbed her weapon into a rat, her determination outpacing her fear. Finally, Dokja ended the skirmish, slashing through the last of the creatures. The group stood amidst the fallen rats, blood pooling beneath their feet. As the chaos settled, Dokja observed the others, noting their progress. Despite their inexperience, they weren't performing badly. Hee-won approached him with a mix of curiosity in her eyes. She asked how many he had managed to kill, and he responded honestly, 4. Hee-won, competitive as ever, grumbled about her own count that she had taken down 2, whereas Hyunsung proudly declared that he took down 3. Dokja was stunned. His count was only 1 less than his, and he had spent considerable resources on increasing his stats. He turned his attention to Hyunsung, opening the man's character profile. The details surprised him. Hyunsong had access to a starter pack, a premium package for incarnations with lower than average stats. It enhanced all his stats by a level and granted a skill called weapon proficiency, invaluable in the early stages. Dokja realized that the Master of Steel constellation must have taken a particular liking to Hyunsong, which explained his strength and effectiveness. Senga voiced the practical concern that lingered in everyone's mind. How would they cook the meat from the ground rats? It was obvious they couldn't eat it raw, but the solution wasn't immediately clear. Dokja assured them they'd find a way, but his calm tone left the others looking at him with suspicion. Had he sounded too indifferent? Hyunsong broke the silence with a direct question. He asked Dokja if he knew more about the situation they were in. The group's gazes intensified, awaiting his answer. Internally, Dokja compared this moment to the experiences of regressors in the novel he had read. They often claimed intuition or crafted careful lies to maintain their advantage. As he pondered his response, a notification flickered in his vision. The constellation, secretive plotter, was watching intently, eager to see his next move. Other constellations also awaited his decision. As the group caught their breath, a sudden scream tore through the air. Han Myung-go shouted in terror as a ground rat latched onto his foot, dragging him with surprising force. Dokja watched the scene unfold, a sharp thought forming in his mind. Han Myung-go once again had found a way to create chaos and avoid scrutiny. Internally, Dokja couldn't help but note the irony of Han's consistent knack for trouble. A notification flickered before Dokja's eyes, acknowledging his observation. The constellation's secretive plotter silently approved of his thoughts. The ground rat tugged Han Myung-go into a tunnel, its grip unrelenting. Senga, being the closest to him, tried to free him, but her attempt backfired as Han grabbed onto her in desperation. The situation escalated further when Lee Hyunsong extended his spear, but the effort was too late. The ground rat, Han Myung-go, and Yu Senga disappeared into the depths of the earth. The group stared at the spot where a deep hole marked their disappearance. Lee Hyunsong, visibly concerned, turned to Dokja and questioned his decision to go alone. Dokja's reasoning was clear. Gil-young's unique ability would help track the ground rat and the others. His calm demeanor contrasted with Hyunsong's worry, but Dokja added a note of reassurance. He asked Hyunsong to keep an eye on Hee-won, subtly pointing out that she wasn't in her best condition. Hyunsong hesitated but eventually agreed, albeit reluctantly. He announced to Hee-won that they should wait for Dokja's signal if anything happened. Hee-won, though exhausted, quietly mumbled her dissent, but her words lacked conviction. Dokja and Gil-young ventured deeper into the tunnels, the oppressive darkness pressing against them. The area, known as the Dark Fold, was infamous for its uncanny ability to absorb all light, making it nearly impossible to distinguish directions. The air was thick and disorienting, but Gil-young moved with certainty, guiding Dokja with quiet confidence. Gil-young's unique skill, interspecies communication, was their beacon in the abyss. Without it, Dokja knew he would have been forced to spend coins just to navigate. His reliance on the boy's ability reinforced how essential Gil-young was to their survival. As they walked, Gil-young's voice cut through the silence with unexpected clarity. He questioned Dokja's earlier actions, his sharp observation revealing a depth beyond his years. Gil-young had noticed that Dokja had deliberately let the ground rat escape with Han Myung-go and Senga. Dokja hesitated, realizing the boy's perceptiveness left little room for deceit. He decided honesty was his best option. Dokja explained the habits of the ground rats. These creatures hoarded their prey and stored valuable items in their lairs, making their nests a treasure trove for those daring enough to venture in. The only way to locate these lairs was to follow the tunnels dug by the rats. Admitting he had expected Han Myung-go to be taken but not Senga, Dokja noted how the plan had partially gone awry. Gil-young listened carefully, then responded with an insight that caught Dokja off guard. The boy remarked that if Dokja were only after the items, he wouldn't have saved him back in the subway. His unwavering faith shone through as he gripped Dokja's hand, a simple gesture of trust that resonated deeply. The notification flickered in Dokja's vision, announcing that a few constellations had been moved by the moment. They gifted 200 coins as a sign of their emotional investment. Dokja, however, felt conflicted. Gil-young's trust was touching, but also burdened him with the weight of responsibility. Inwardly, he couldn't help but think that the boy's faith stemmed from naivety. Gil-young was still a child, unaware of the harsh realities of a world filled with deceitful adults who might exploit his maturity. As they pushed further into the tunnel, tunnels, the oppressive atmosphere seemed to lighten. Gil-young's quiet voice broke the silence. He wanted to understand Dokja's place in this world. Was he a god, or perhaps the protagonist of this grim tale? Dokja admitted that he was neither, confessing that he had always envied protagonists, the central figures of stories who carried the weight of their worlds. Gil-young's follow-up questions delved deeper, as he wondered if clearing all the scenarios would grant them a wish, as such stories often promised. Dokja pondered the boys' hopeful optimism, which stood in stark contrast to the harsh reality of their situation. Those who managed to adapt to this new, cruel world suffered in unique ways. Some were driven to madness, others clung to blind faith, and a few found solace in unyielding optimism. Gil-young's question embodied the latter, a fragile hope clinging to the idea of a brighter end. Despite his inner turmoil, Dokja responded with reassurance. Tapping Gil-young lightly on the shoulder, he affirmed the boy's belief, even though his heart wavered under the weight of the lie. In the pitch darkness of the tunnel, his expression remained hidden, a small mercy that allowed him to conceal the guilt he felt. Dokja silently acknowledged his own flaws, calling himself a despicable adult, but he also recognized Gil-young's determination to survive in this world, despite its harshness. The path became treacherous as they progressed. The ground grew slick, forcing them to slide carefully along the slippery surface. They finally came to a halt as the tunnel opened up into a larger chamber. A notification suddenly appeared in Dokja's vision, announcing that the sub-scenario had been updated. The message confirmed that they had entered the ground rat's treasure trove. Gil-young's voice cut through the silence in disbelief, his words revealing his shock. Dokja quickly silenced him, placing a hand over Gil-young's mouth to prevent him from speaking any further. There was no time for words now, not when danger loomed so close. He warned Gil-young to stay quiet, emphasizing that the treasure was not the only thing the rats stored in their lair. The ground seemed to tremble as loud growls echoed throughout the cavernous space. The ground rats began to crawl in, their numbers increasing rapidly. Dokja and Gil-young quickly found cover, hiding in the shadows, carefully watching the creatures from a safe distance. The tension in the air heightened with every passing moment. Then, amidst the growls, the faint murmur of voices reached their ears. It was Han and Senga, tied up and seemingly trapped. Their argument broke the uneasy silence. Han's voice rose with frustration as he blamed Senga for their predicament, accusing her of dragging him into the chaos. Senga, confused and defensive, didn't understand what she had done wrong. Han's irrational anger only deepened the rift as he lashed out with wild accusations. Dokja listened intently, piecing together the strange details of their situation. He reflected on the conversation, the strange reasoning behind Han's actions. Han, always unpredictable, had somehow found himself on the subway, not in his usual Z-Class Benz. The truth slowly unraveled, and Dokja realized that Han had stolen Senga's bike, an action that had set off a chain of events that led them here. The bickering between Han and Senga continued, their exchange escalating as they shouted at each other over petty grievances. Dokja's focus shifted, his instincts sharpening. He wasn't quite ready to act, but there was no time to waste. Han's irrationality and the danger closing in made the decision for him. Dokja reached for the thorn, gripping it tightly in his hand, and without hesitation, he threw it with full force. The thorn shot through the air like a bullet, its trajectory precise and deadly. Han, startled by the sudden attack, flinched in terror, his eyes wide with fear as the thorn passed right by him and slammed into the wall with a deafening crack. Senga, on the other hand, was filled with relief, a look of delight crossing her face as she finally saw the figure who had come to their aid. The cracks on the walls spread rapidly, a clear sign that something dangerous was approaching. The deep tremors in the ground seemed to resonate with the fear of the ground rats, who trembled as they sensed the impending threat. Dokja could feel the weight of the moment, his eyes fixed on the shifting shadows, and he whispered to Gil-young that something was coming. The air grew heavier, the footsteps echoing in the distance, making the tension even more palpable. Senga and Han were terrified, their anxiety rising as the approaching danger drew near. Dokja took in the atmosphere, noting the overwhelming presence of black ether, which overflowed to the point of manifesting as black flames. The force was rooted deep within the dark fold, and it was no surprise that it came from the very dark roots themselves. It was there that the Warden of the Dark was known to appear, a being tied to the dark forces of this world. As the eerie quiet enveloped them, a notification flashed in Dokja's vision, confirming that the Warden of the Dark had appeared. The sub-scenario had been updated that defeat the Warden. The fight was now inevitable. Suddenly, Gil-young doubled over, his body trembling as he collapsed to the ground, his face contorting in discomfort. The mental strain from the insects connected to him had clearly taken its toll. Dokja reassured Gil-young, telling him it was fine to let it out. As Gil-young continued to struggle, Dokja's mind raced. raced. The damage was clear. Gil-young's powers had a significant mental toll, and even with his ability to communicate with other species, there were limits to how much he could handle. As Senga and Han screamed in panic, Dokja was quick to act. He rushed towards them and swiftly slashed the stems that had bound them. The blade cut cleanly through, but as Dokja thought, the blade had already started to lose its edge. The force behind the demonic species was becoming evident. The Warden of the Dark, a tier 7 demonic species, was a formidable opponent. Dokja recognized the power of this demon, noting that the demonic species were unique and that they held an upper hand even over other monsters. The treasures the ground rats collected were essentially sacrifices made to the demonic species. The Warden of the Dark turned towards Dokja, its gaze filled with malice. Dokja, sensing the shift in the atmosphere, immediately told Senga and Han to stay back, understanding that the situation had escalated beyond their control. Another notification popped into Dokja's vision, confirming that the Warden of the Dark had received the Demon King's blessing. The situation immediately grew worse. Dokja had hoped to avoid any confrontation with this creature, knowing the dangers it posed. The Warden spoke in an incomprehensible language, its guttural words reverberating through the air. Dokja strained to make sense of the sounds, but couldn't decipher them. A dark, suffocating aura emanated from the Warden, filling the space with an overwhelming sense of fear. However, Dokja's personal skill, Fourth Wall, nullified most of the fear's effects, allowing him to remain composed. The Warden roared again, the sound shaking the area. Dokja clenched his fists, realizing how precarious the situation was. He had no idea what the creature was saying or what it wanted, and he had no clear strategy to deal with it. Amidst the tension, Senga suddenly spoke, her voice trembling as she repeated a word the Warden had uttered. Startled, Dokja turned toward her and questioned why she hadn't retreated as he had instructed. Senga hesitated but explained that the monster seemed to be saying mother. Her words only added to the confusion. Dokja tried to mimic the Warden's language, but his attempts were clumsy. Senga, on the other hand, seemed to instinctively understand the sounds. She corrected his pronunciation, and the Warden responded with a loud affirmative roar. Dokja observed in disbelief as Senga managed to communicate with the creature. A notification confirmed that Senga had activated her skill interpretation. Dokja couldn't help but marvel at her adaptability. Even in the chaos of the apocalypse, her talents shone through. She had proven herself useful in an unexpected way. Senga hesitated for a moment before explaining the Warden's words. According to her, it was asking for a mother. The absurdity of the situation left everyone momentarily stunned. Senga, flustered, muttered that she wasn't even married yet. The Warden, undeterred, turned its gaze toward Han. With a growling repetition of mother, it seemed to be extending its bizarre request to him as well. Han's reaction was immediate, his voice filled with indignation as he declared that if anyone should assume such a role, he should be the father. The Warden's tentacles writhed menacingly before one shot out with alarming speed, like an arrow loosed from a bow. The appendage surged forward and forced itself into Han Myung-go's mouth with a sickening thrust. Senga and Dokja stood frozen, horrified by the grotesque sight unfolding before them. Han struggled, muffled sounds of resistance escaping as his throat convulsed. The vile creature's intent became disturbingly clear. Dokja's thoughts raced as he pieced together what was happening. The Warden wasn't asking for a mother in the traditional sense. It was attempting to implant its offspring into Han. Without hesitation, Dokja rushed forward. His blade slashed through the writhing tentacle, severing it cleanly and halting the grotesque process in an instant. The Warden screeched in agony, its cries echoing through the air as black ichor spurted from the wound. Before Dokja could reposition, another tentacle lashed out toward him with ferocious speed. He raised his weapon just in time, blocking the attack, but the Warden didn't relent. It thrashed violently, unleashing a barrage of tentacles from its grotesque form. Dokja countered each strike, but the relentless assault began to wear him down. Cracks appeared on his weapon, a crude tool made from ground rat materials. Dokja cursed under his breath as the weapon shattered in his hands. He knew the Warden wasn't placed here as an easy target, unlike the ichthyosaur. Defeating this creature was beyond him. His original plan had been simple: wait for the Warden to leave and claim the treasure it guarded. But Han, the fool, had ruined everything. Dokja, however, was always prepared with a backup plan. As the Warden prepared another attack, Dokja raised his voice, demanding the attention of a dokkaebi. His gamble paid off when Beryu, the observing dokkaebi, appeared, startled and caught off guard. Dokja reminded Beryu that an item should have arrived in his possession by now, pressing the dokkaebi to hand it over. Beryu, flustered, hesitated, claiming it wasn't his responsibility, but Dokja, sharp as ever, pointed out that Beryu was here to manage in Bahyong's absence. Beryu hesitated under the mounting pressure from the constellations. Notifications continued to flood Dokja's vision, reflecting the displeasure of the watchers. The prisoner of the golden headband was relentless in browbeating Beryu, and the demonic judge of fire added its own ominous threats. He begrudgingly complied, muttering excuses about doing it only for the sake of making things interesting. Meanwhile, Dokja was already moving. As he maneuvered, a notification confirmed the arrival of an item from the dokkaebi auction house. Earlier, after defeating the ichthyosaur, Dokja had acquired its nucleus, a valuable resource. Instead of trading it for something mundane, he had specifically sought out the weapon known as Broken Faith. Now, the payoff for his calculated gamble was in his hands. The item materialized before him, and a streak of light formed into his grasp. A broken blade took shape, its edges jagged and incomplete, glowing faintly. Dokja swung the weapon immediately, cutting through the approaching tentacles with precision. The warden froze momentarily, its many eyes locked onto the broken sword in Dokja's hands. Beryu, still observing, scoffed at the sight. He dismissed the weapon as useless, emphasizing its broken state and lack of compatibility with ordinary users. Dokja, however, paid no mind to the dokkaebi's taunts. He knew exactly what he was doing. This wasn't a random purchase. A system notification confirmed the weapon's worn state, warning that its durability was insufficient for effective use. But Dokja was prepared. He activated the Archdemon's Eyeball and the White Star weapon Aura, two items he had previously acquired. Their synergy began to work instantly. The broken sword in Dokja's hand emitted a violent burst of light. The jagged edges glowed brightly, and the weapon began to reconstruct itself as if responding to his magic power. The transformation was stunning, and even Beryu, who had been mocking moments earlier, was left speechless. The notifications flickered rapidly. The system acknowledged that the White Star weapon Aura had been activated. The Broken Faith, infused with Dokja's magic, reacted violently, its incomplete form evolving into a radiant blade of power. The Warden of the Dark roared in rage and charged at Dokja with renewed fury. Its tentacles lashed out, aiming to overwhelm him. Dokja gripped the glowing sword tightly, his stance unwavering. With a single precise swing, the radiant blade cleaved through the oncoming tentacles. The severed appendages fell to the ground in pieces as the warden howled in pain, its monstrous form writhing in agony. Dokja evaluated his situation. This weapon, designed specifically to combat demonic species, was his best chance at survival. However, it came at a cost. The blade consumed an enormous amount of mana with each use, leaving Dokja painfully aware of his limitations. Unlike those blessed with innate combat skills like blade proficiency or combat sense, he was not a swordsman, but Dokja didn't need to be. He was a reader. The memories of the novel 3 Ways to Survive the Apocalypse resurfaced in his mind with vivid clarity. The system's notification confirmed that his attribute was enhancing his memory of the text, allowing him to recall the intricacies of events he had read. This was his edge, knowing the enemy's patterns before they happened. As the warden's tentacles struck out with deadly force, Dokja dodged each attack with precision. Activating his personal skill, Bookmark, Dokja selected the second slot, invoking the abilities of Lee Hansung. A surge of strength coursed through his body, enhancing his stamina and reflexes just as he needed them most. With everything he had, Dokja pushed forward, weaving through the storm of tentacles. The battlefield became a blur of motion, the ground a canvas of chaos. Yet through the whirlwind of attacks, Dokja focused only on his objective. His blade flashed like a streak of white lightning, cutting through the tentacles with unerring precision. The warden's attacks followed a predictable rhythm, something Dokja had already memorized. After every 2 strikes, there was a momentary pause. Exploiting this brief window, Dokja struck again, severing the remaining tentacles in a blinding arc of light. The warden howled in agony. Its words were incomprehensible, but Senga, using her interpretation skill, translated. The creature was questioning how Dokja could anticipate its moves with such accuracy. Dokja's response, simple yet profound, resonated in his mind. This wasn't about strength or skill, it was about understanding, about reading. The warden collapsed, its severed tentacles sprawled lifelessly on the ground, leaving only the battered form of the Dark Keeper, its heavy breaths the sole indication of its lingering life. Beryu, the dokkaebi, was visibly shaken. His disbelief was palpable as he muttered to himself, marveling at what he had just witnessed. Notifications flooded the air once more. The abyssal black flame dragon was astonished, its surprise evident. Other constellations were equally stunned, questioning their own perceptions. The prisoner of the golden headband, ever excitable, reacted with unrestricted unrestrained enthusiasm, pulling at his hair in exhilaration. Baryu, regaining some composure, whispered in awe about the appearance of the ether blade so early in the scenario. However, Dokja knew better. The Blade of Faith was not a true ether blade. It was a shadow of the real thing, far less powerful than its genuine counterpart. Baryu reluctantly explained the mechanics of the weapon Dokja had used. The Blade of Faith, combined with the White Star weapon aura, formed a temporary blade by absorbing magic power. However, its durability was fleeting. A system notification appeared, confirming that the durability of Broken Faith had run out and that it could no longer be used. Baryu expressed frustration, lamenting the peculiar individuals drawn to Baehyung's channel, but Dokja, focused and composed, demanded the completion of the sub-scenario reward. A flurry of notifications confirmed the fulfillment of the scenario's conditions, granting him 500 coins. Several constellations acknowledged Dokja's strategic brilliance, their interest piqued by his calculated approach. Baryu, however, was baffled by Dokja's next move. The Warden of the Dark, though defeated, was still alive. Baryu questioned why Dokja didn't finish the creature off, emphasizing the potential reward for killing it. Dokja, outwardly calm, claimed he didn't believe in killing unnecessarily or taking lives carelessly. Yet, inwardly, he admitted to himself that this was a lie, a mask to hide his true thoughts. Baryu pressed further, revealing the immense reward at stake. Killing a tier 7 demonic species would grant a first kill bonus of over 7,000 coins, a staggering sum in this world. But Dokja, brushing off the dokkaebi's insistence, shifted his focus, declaring his intention to open treasure chests instead. Before Dokja could act, Han Myungo made his move. Without hesitation, Han drove a weapon into the fallen warden, delivering a fatal blow. The Warden of the Dark let out a final guttural sound as its life was extinguished. Notifications erupted immediately. The tier 7 demonic species had been slain, an impossible feat had been achieved, and a first kill bonus of 8,000 coins was awarded. The contribution was divided between Dokja and Han Myungo, but Han's wild laughter filled the air. Consumed by a mix of triumph and madness, Han reveled in his deed. He mocked Dokja openly, ridiculing his earlier stance on sparing the creature. Han declared that a world like this demanded ruthlessness, not idealism. He scoffed at the idea of mercy, proclaiming that Dokja's so-called principles would lead him to failure and obscurity in this brutal reality. Suddenly, a new set of notifications blared into the air. The system announced that the tier 7 demonic species, the Warden of the Dark, had been slain. However, the price of victory was steep. The Demon King, the god of wrath and lust, had taken notice of the act. A dark message followed, a warning that the Demon King would hunt down the one who delivered the finishing blow. The murderer, Han Myungo, had been cursed by the wrathful god. Han's triumph shattered instantly. Fear gripped him as he realized the gravity of the situation. He was marked, his name tied to the warden's death, and now cursed to face his worst nightmare. Dokja stood silently, his calm demeanor unchanged as he watched Han's panic unfold. Inwardly, Dokja reflected on his decision not to kill the warden himself. He knew that demonic species monsters were connected to the demon kings they worshipped, inheriting fragments of their master's power through the dark roots. Killing such creatures brought not just rewards, but also the inevitable wrath of the demon kings they served. The curse of the god of wrath and lust would force Han Myungo to confront something unimaginably horrific. As Han trembled under the weight of his fate, another notification flickered. The constellation known as the Secretive Plotter had recommended Dokja's scenario to the Starstream, further cementing his growing reputation. Dokja allowed himself a faint smile, his calculated actions paying off in ways only he could foresee. Turning his attention away from Han, Dokja shifted focus to the task at hand. The treasure chests scattered in the aftermath of the battle. He suggested they open them, his voice calm and composed. After a brief search, Senga uncovered a small bracelet identified as a magic power recovery bracelet, while Gilyong found a rusty iron shield. Dokja, however, was less impressed by the finds. He thought to himself that the treasures seemed underwhelming, likely because the protagonist of 3 Ways to Survive the Apocalypse had already been here and claimed the best items. Nevertheless, Dokja assured the group that there was still one more chest left. Opening the final box, Dokja uncovered a unique item, a mana brazier. The artifact glowed faintly, its presence exuding an aura of untapped potential. Dokja activated the mana brazier, channeling magic power into it. A soft hum resonated as the brazier ignited, radiating a gentle warmth. Without hesitation, Dokja picked up the leg of a dead ground rat, a greasy and unappetizing piece of meat, and placed it over the magical flame. The scent of roasting meat soon filled the air, a welcome change from the harsh, suffocating environment they had endured. Senga hesitated, drawn by the aroma dilemma, but unsure of its safety, her curiosity mingled with hunger, a need amplified by the 3 days they had gone without a proper meal. Gilyong, barely able to contain his excitement, watched as the meat cooked, his mouth watering at the sight. Dokja, without a word, grabbed the cooked hind leg and tore into it, testing its safety himself. The greasy texture and unfamiliar taste weren't exactly appealing, but it was edible. Seeing Dokja eat without issue, Senga and Gilyong rushed to join him, their hunger overriding any hesitation. As they ate, Dokja reflected on the stark difference between reading about scenarios like this in a novel and living through them. The taste of survival was far more visceral than he had imagined. Han Myungo, having recovered slightly, approached the group hesitantly. The earlier confidence he had displayed was now replaced by a cautious demeanor. He began to speak, attempting to apologize for his earlier actions. Dokja, however, dismissed the tension. He gestured toward the food, urging Han to eat. Han, surprised by the gesture, didn't hesitate long and joined the others, grateful for the unexpected forgiveness. As they ate, Senga broke the silence, her voice tinged with curiosity. She marveled at Dokja's ability to navigate their dire circumstances with such precision. She couldn't help but wonder how he seemed to know so much, from cooking a monster they had never encountered to understanding the intricacies of their situation. Dokja, ever guarded, deflected the question with a casual explanation. Senga, however, attributed his knowledge to his extensive reading. Her admiration for him evident, she expressed her gratitude, feeling inadequate in comparison to his contributions. Dokja, ever perceptive, reassured her. He acknowledged her efforts, pointing out her ability to understand the monster earlier due to her diligent study of foreign languages. Senga smiled at his words, finding comfort in his acknowledgement of her worth. Senga noticed Dokja staring intently at the black box. Curious, she leaned closer and pointed out the faint writings etched on its surface. Her sharp observation revealed a detail that even Dokja hadn't fully processed. She deciphered the text aloud, calling it a random item box. The revelation startled Dokja. He hadn't expected her to read the ancient language so effortlessly. He quickly composed himself, acknowledging her contribution with feigned surprise, praising her for deciphering the words. Inwardly, Dokja's mind raced. He recalled from the novel that this seemingly innocuous black box was the true treasure hidden in the scenario. Even Jung Hyuk, the protagonist, wouldn't uncover its significance until his 6th regression. The first known discovery of the box was by a character called the Flying Fox, and it had been regarded as a game-changing artifact. For Dokja, this was an opportunity to wield a powerful advantage far earlier than anyone else. Senga, unaware of the box's true potential, encouraged Dokja to use it, assuring him that he deserved to keep any items they found. Dokja opened the box. He carefully placed the Tier 7 demonic species monster core, which he had obtained from the Warden of the Dark, into the box. Alongside it, he added Broken Faith, the shattered weapon he had wielded in the earlier battle. Bearyu, who had been silently observing until now, suddenly grew alarmed. The dokkaebi's expression shifted from detached interest to outright panic as he realized the box's significance. He muttered nervously about how such a rare item could still exist in the early scenarios, claiming that it had been removed from circulation long ago. Dokja ignored the Bearyu's ramblings and closed the lid of the box. A tense silence followed, broken only by Bearyu's frantic warnings. Bearyu's voice rose as he tried to explain the box's function. Low-grade items placed within it could be transformed into high-grade items with guaranteed success. Moments later, a dazzling light erupted from the sealed box, illuminating the room. The intensity of the light was almost blinding, and its brilliance filled the area with an air of anticipation. Bearyu, now thoroughly panicked, mumbled something about ending the stream. His voice trembled as he hastily shut down his channel, unable to handle the implications of what had just happened. A notification appeared before Dokja, confirming the outcome. The system declared that the resulting item would be a bladed weapon, influenced by the fact that Broken Faith had been placed inside. Moreover, the probability of an item associated with a powerful constellation appearing had significantly increased due to the unique components used in the process. Dokja silently hoped for something extraordinary, anything beyond an A-grade item. The sound of the system notification echoed in his mind as it announced the emergence of a high-grade item. The box trembled slightly before releasing a soft click, signaling that its contents were ready. Dokja opened it cautiously. Inside lay a silver guard and a pristine white blade. Both emanated an otherworldly glow, their craftsmanship radiating power and significance. The system provided a detailed description of the blade. Unbroken Faith, a constellation artifact of immense rarity. It had once belonged to the hero Kaizenix, who had led the Grusiad during the Great Demon Age. The blade, imbued with fire, darkness, and divine power, was forged through Kaizenix's unparalleled ether dominance, which allowed him to create the legendary Blade of Faith. The weapon also carried an additional enhancement, boosting the wielder's strength and physique levels by 2. Senga, still standing nearby, was visibly awestruck. Even without in-depth knowledge of the Starstream's mechanics, she could tell this weapon was extraordinary. Her amazement mirrored Dokja's internal disbelief. Dokja marveled silently at his luck. A constellation artifact was leagues beyond anything alphabetically graded. It was a game-changing item, far exceeding his expectations. After confirming with both Senga and Gil-young, who nodded in agreement, Dokja decided to claim the artifact. With the treasure secured, Dokja suggested they return to their base. There were plenty of ground rats back where they came from, and the mana brazier could make their meals far more palatable. He also noted that with Gil-young's interspecies communication skill, gathering food would be easier. As they prepared to leave, Gil-young suddenly stopped. He pointed out something unsettling. There were no insects around. Dokja considered this, wondering if the Warden of the Dark's death had caused all the insects in the area to explode. Still, it seemed strange that not even one remained. Gil-young then admitted there was one insect nearby, but didn't elaborate further. Instead, he closed his eyes and began concentrating. His small frame trembled slightly as his focus deepened, and then blood began to drip from his nose. Alarmed, Senga noticed the change and called out, drawing Dokja's attention to the boy. Dokja's voice cut through the tense atmosphere as he tried to reach Gil-young, but the boy didn't respond. Before Dokja could react further, a deafening vibration shook the ground. Dust rained down from above, and the tremors grew more intense. The source of the disturbance was coming from the surface. Dokja's instincts screamed as he assessed the situation. The monsters above ground were no ordinary creatures. They were incredibly dangerous, with many high-grade beasts roaming the area. Among them was the Insect King, a terrifying monarch species that spelled disaster for anyone it encountered. Dokja realized what was happening. Gil-young was attempting to channel the Insect King. A surge of urgency coursed through Dokja. He grabbed Gil-young's shoulders and shook him. The boy blinked, his focus breaking, and his eyes slowly met Dokja's. Gil-young seemed dazed but conscious. Dokja firmly told him to stop using the skill, recognizing the catastrophic consequences if Gil-young succeeded in summoning such a dangerous creature. The danger passed, but not without a cost. Dokja placed a reassuring hand on Gil-young's head, warning him to avoid using the skill again until he explicitly allowed it. Gil-young nodded, his expression filled with guilt and exhaustion. Turning to the situation at hand, Dokja noted that moving forward immediately wasn't an option. The Black Tide, an unpredictable and hazardous zone, was too dangerous to navigate in their current state. They needed to wait until a smaller, less threatening insect appeared to guide them safely. Before Dokja could finalize a plan, Senga stepped forward. Her face was calm but determined as she explained that she might have a way to help. From her fingertips, a faintly glowing thread began to form, stretching out in the direction of the exit. Dokja watched as the thread connected her to something outside. Senga revealed that she had tied the thread to something earlier when she had been kidnapped. Her quick thinking had provided them with a chance to escape the labyrinth safely. Dokja felt a mix of admiration and curiosity. He asked her about her personal attribute, knowing it might hold the key to understanding her abilities. Senga hesitated, visibly uncomfortable with the question. Realizing his mistake, Dokja reassured her that she didn't need to share anything she wasn't comfortable disclosing. However, Dokja's keen mind pieced together a few clues. It seemed Senga's Starstream contract included an additional pledge that prevented her from leaking any information about her attribute. If she broke the pledge, it would cost her life. The skill she displayed, a thread to escape labyrinths, hinted at the influence of a particular constellation. Dokja couldn't confirm which constellation had chosen her, but it was clear that they had begun training her for something greater. Curiosity gnawed at him, prompting Dokja to activate his character profile skill to gather more information. A notification appeared in his vision that this character does not have a registered character profile, currently collecting information about the corresponding figure. As expected, the skill provided no immediate insight. This was strange. Dokja had never seen such a message before, and it left him unsettled. Something was off. Suddenly, a notification flashed across his vision, signaling that channel BI7623 had reopened. The channel's return brought with it a familiar presence. Baehyung, a figure Dokja knew well, though his methods were far from conventional. Baehyung wasted no time, greeting the others with a wink, and questioned how they all have been while he was away. As the group ventured out of the lair and back to the station, Hee-won couldn't help but munch on the rat meat they had gathered. Her eyes lit up as she savored the taste, commenting on how delicious it was. Dokja, with his usual pragmatic mindset, informed her that the meat would help recover some health. Baehyung's voice echoed in Dokja's mind, acknowledging the remarkable feats he had accomplished during during his absence. Dokja immediately recognized the method of contact, dokkaebi communication. What intrigued him most, however, was Byung's awareness of his actions despite being away. The situation was growing increasingly strange. Dokja wondered aloud whether Byung had been recalled because of his actions. Byung's response was far from clear. He admitted that his return was indeed related to Dokja, but the reason had more to do with a warning from the management due to his abrupt shutdown of the channel and the extended advertisement. He dismissed it casually as though it were just a minor inconvenience. Dokja's curiosity grew and questioned him that how did he knew about the random item box. Byung sighed, revealing that the box had been a remnant of an embarrassing past. In his greed, he had created the item box only to regret it later. Meanwhile, Hee-won had noticed the abundance of new items Dokja had obtained, including the mana brazier. She remarked on it with genuine interest. Dokja, never one to hide his achievements, acknowledged that he had indeed acquired a few new items. As the conversation continued, Lee Hyun-sung picked up the shield and began polishing it. His face lit up as he worked, clearly pleased with the item. Dokja couldn't help but notice the shift in Hyun-sung's demeanor. A notification chimed in his vision that Hyun-sung has begun to show some loyalty towards you. As Hee-won surveyed the items in Dokja's possession, a sense of envy crossed her face. She seemed desperate to find anything useful to help her survive. However, Dokja was clear in his decisions and firm in his refusals. She glanced at the sword in his hand, but it was clear that he had no intention of parting with it. Hee-won noted his selfishness as she observed his unwillingness to share even the meat, which he intended to sell for coins rather than distribute among others. She couldn't help but think how frugal and calculating he was. Dokja, unfazed, remarked on his survival skills as they approached the station once more. The atmosphere inside was tense and agitated. People murmured anxiously, their voices blending into a cacophony of desperation. Dokja immediately noticed the growing unrest and began to assess the situation. Notifications flickered into his vision, and the cause of the commotion became clear. The message was a stark reminder. There were only 20 minutes left until the mandatory survival fee collection. Each person was required to have 100 coins, and failure to pay would result in death. This collection would continue until the second main scenario was cleared. Realization struck Dokja like a lightning bolt. The urgency of the checkout time loomed over him. Around him, the noise of panicked voices grew louder. A woman clutching a small child pleaded tearfully with the crowd. She begged for spare coins, promising to repay anyone who helped her. Meanwhile, another man offered exorbitant sums of money, millions of won, for just 100 coins, trying to buy his way out of this apocalyptic scenario. A frantic man pushed his way through the crowd, calling out for his sister. She had joined the search party earlier, promising to share her coins with him upon return. His desperation turned into despair as he confronted a group of people who had been part of that search. They responded with indifference, mocking him and questioning whether she had ever really volunteered. Their callous laughter stung like a whip. Hee-won's anger boiled over as she observed the group mocking the man who was frantically searching for his sister. The cruelty and indifference of those around them made her clench her fists tightly. Just then, Dokja heard a familiar voice. In-ho approached him with an exaggerated cheerfulness, his tone tinged with false friendliness. He recalled that Dokja had the most coins among them and eagerly pointed this out, his words carrying a clear intent to stir the crowd. In-ho's grin widened as he activated his skill, Insight, sending a ripple of tension through the already chaotic atmosphere. Dokja's mind sharpened with awareness. Coins were power in this world, and as the person with the most coins at Gyumho Station, he had become a target. He could feel the weight of the crowd's stares as they turned their attention to him. Whispers spread quickly, and the murmur of the word coins grew louder. A desperate woman broke through the crowd and ran toward Dokja, her voice trembling as she pleaded for help. She needed just 100 coins, her survival depending on his generosity. Her desperation was mirrored in the eyes of others who had begun to inch closer, their hopes pinned on the idea that Dokja might be their savior. In-ho, ever the manipulator, capitalized on the moment. With a mocking tone, he made it clear to everyone that while he lacked the coins to help, Dokja had plenty to spare. His words were carefully chosen to paint Dokja into a corner, framing him as the only one capable of saving these people. The crowd grew more agitated, their pleas turning into a cacophony of demands. Internally, Dokja's frustration mounted. In-ho's cunning strategy had effectively turned the crowd against him. As people surrounded him, desperation and greed filled their eyes. Dokja calculated the potential loss. If he gave each person 100 coins, he would lose around 2,000 coins, a significant portion of his resources. Yet, if he refused refused, he would become the villain in their eyes. The situation was complicated further by the theme of the first scenario, original sin. These people, who had already taken lives to survive, now begged for help instead of taking responsibility for their own survival. Dokja weighed the morality of his choices against the brutal logic of this new world. Above them, Baekhyang observed the unfolding drama with gleeful delight. The countdown continued, with only 10 minutes remaining until the survival fee would be collected. His laughter echoed in the air, further emphasizing the dire stakes of the moment. Closing his eyes briefly, Dokja tried to center himself. His vision filled with flickering notifications. Messages from the constellations appeared, their cryptic yet intense focus pressing down on him. The secretive plotter, the prisoner of the golden headband, and the demon-like judge of fire were all watching his decision with interest. Opening his eyes, Dokja surveyed the desperate crowd. Their frantic energy swirled around him, a mix of anger, fear, and greed. He weighed their desperation and their accusations. He questioned, why should he play along with their demands? Dokja had no intention of bending to Inho's manipulative games. His cold demeanor reflected this resolve. Inho, however, burst into laughter, his voice booming across the station, as though relishing the spectacle he had orchestrated. His amusement emboldened the crowd, and they began shouting accusations. The crowd was furious, accusing Dokja of greed and selfishness. Some claimed he had exploited them by selling food at high prices, depriving others of their survival. A few demanded refunds, their desperation escalating into rage. Senga and Hyunsung tried to intervene, their voices standing out amidst the shouting. Senga pleaded for calm, and Hyunsung defended Dokja's actions, arguing against the crowd's portrayal of him, but their voices were drowned out by the mounting hostility. Inho, his tone oozing false sincerity, gave Dokja an ultimatum: return the coins to the people or face the consequences. The veiled threat hung in the air, stirring the mob further. Dokja, however, was unfazed. His eyes glinted coldly as he dismissed Inho's warning. The crowd surged forward, their desperation boiling over into violence. Armed with metal pipes and makeshift weapons, they charged at Dokja, their rage fueling their steps. With a calm precision, Dokja unsheathed his sword. The blade gleamed as he moved swiftly, countering the first attacker. A man swung a pipe at him, but Dokja retaliated with a decisive strike, severing the man's arm. Blood sprayed as the severed limb hit the ground alongside the weapon. The man's scream of agony echoed through the station, halting the mob in their tracks. The crowd froze, horrified by the sudden brutality. Dokja stood firm, his voice cutting through the silence. He coldly questioned their actions, challenging them to reflect on their blame. How pathetic it was that they chose to hold him responsible for their situation instead of taking accountability for themselves. In the momentary calm, Dokja quickly checked the character profile of the man he had just disarmed. The information confirmed his suspicions. The man's name was Minsang Han, and his stats were unusually high for an ordinary person. His background as a gangster explained his boldness and his willingness to resort to violence. Dokja addressed the crowd with cold clarity, his words cutting through the noise like a blade. The people around him were terrified, not just of him, but of the unknown forces manipulating them. He pointed out the truth they were too afraid to acknowledge. They weren't angry at him for his coins or his actions. They were terrified of the Cholsu gang. The gang had more coins, higher stats, and the strength to dominate them all. Inho, ever the manipulator, laughed mockingly, attempting to undermine Dokja's words. But Dokja pressed on, directing the crowd's attention to the harsh realities they had ignored. Why did the gang have more coins? Why were their stats so high? It wasn't simply because they were gangsters. The answer lay in something much darker. Notifications flickered in Dokja's vision. The incarnations around him were growing increasingly agitated. One man in the crowd hesitated, his voice shaking as he questioned how the Cholsu gang had amassed such wealth and power. Dokja didn't hesitate. He pointed out the stark reality. When he arrived, there had been 87 people at the station. Now only around 50 remained. The crowd's collective denial surfaced as someone stammered that the missing people must have been killed by monsters during patrols. But Dokja shattered their fragile illusion. He asked them why no one from the Cholsu gang had ever died. Why was it that the gang always returned from patrols stronger than before? His words pierced through the crowd's ignorance, forcing them to confront the truth they had refused to see. As his reasoning unraveled the lies, the notifications in his vision multiplied. The secretive plotter nodded in agreement with Dokja's deductions, while the prisoner of the golden headband grew increasingly excited, pulling his hair in anticipation of what would happen next. The crowd's fear shifted. Their anger now turned towards Inho and the gang. A man, his voice laced with rage, demanded answers. Had the gang been killing survivors to steal their coins? Inho tried to deny it, shouting that Dokja was lying, but the cracks in his facade were clear, and the the crowd was no longer willing to listen. Their agitation escalated, and they began to surround the gang, their voices trembling with betrayal. Baekhyung's voice cut through the chaos, gleefully reminding everyone that only 7 minutes remained. The crowd's tension reached its peak as they turned on the Cholsu gang, their trust shattered and their survival instincts driving them to action. Dokja's voice rose above the chaos. He demanded that they take action, urging them to reclaim their dignity and fight for their survival with their own strength. His words, sharp and unwavering, ignited something in the hearts of the people. The crowd roared in agreement, their anger turning into determination. They rallied together, shouting in defiance against the Cholsu gang. Even a mother armed her young child Daeong, instructing them to follow her lead. With weapons raised, the emboldened crowd surged toward the gang, ready to fight. The Cholsu gang members, seeing the tide turning, rushed toward Dokja in desperation, seeking to eliminate him as the source of their problems. But they underestimated him. With precise movements, Dokja's blade struck and a brilliant white light filled the space. The gang members fell, their screams echoing as their arms and legs were severed. The incapacitated gang members begged for mercy, their arrogance shattered. But before Dokja could respond, a figure stepped forward, a presence both fierce and resolute. It was Hee-won. Her blade struck swiftly, finishing off the fallen gang members without hesitation. She told Dokja to step back, claiming the remaining gang members as her responsibility. Hee-won's transformation was undeniable. A radiant brilliance surrounded her as the conditions for her attribute were fulfilled. The notifications confirmed it. The dormant attribute, crouching figure, had fully evolved. Hee-won's attribute blossomed into Judge of Evil, a rare and powerful attribute among the judges. Dokja recognized its significance immediately. The Judge of Evil was the most formidable among the 3 judges, a role destined to deliver justice without compromise. Notifications flooded Dokja's vision, confirming his role in aiding Hee-won's evolution. His contributions had earned her unwavering loyalty. She would not hesitate to become his sword in the future. As Hee-won activated her exclusive skill, Time of Judgment, the entire atmosphere grew suffocating with its sheer intensity. The absolute good constellations had granted their approval, and the skill unleashed its full power. Hee-won's figure became enveloped in a bloody aura, her movements fluid yet precise. Her blade cut through the air with a haunting grace, leaving trails of crimson wherever it passed. Her kendo strikes were both swift and devastating, slicing through the members of the Cholsu group with lethal efficiency. Blood sprayed in all directions, painting the battlefield in red. It was a scene of absolute carnage. While others fought valiantly, including Senga, Lee Hyun-song, and even the young Gil-young, none displayed the ferocity of Hee-won. Her attacks were relentless, her movements unyielding. If Dokja disarmed an opponent, she finished them without hesitation, striking with precision at vital points. The battlefield seemed to bend to her will, as if she had been waiting for this moment all her life. Blood pooled beneath her feet, and the lifeless bodies of the Cholsu group members piled around her. One by one, they fell until only Inho Cheon remained. Inho's laughter broke through the eerie silence as he locked eyes with Dokja. His voice trembled with disbelief and desperation, but before he could finish his words, Hee-won's blade descended in a single decisive motion, splitting him from top to bottom. For a moment, Dokja observed the aftermath. It was almost surreal to think that just moments ago, these people were sharing food and laughter. The battlefield, now painted in blood, served as a harsh reminder of the brutal reality they faced. The constellations watching from the channel were ecstatic, their collective excitement reverberating through the notifications. Then came the dreaded notification that the survival fees will now be collected. The sound of popping filled the air as those without coins began to vanish, their lives extinguished without fanfare. Hee-won, now drained of energy, collapsed onto the blood-soaked ground. Her breath came in heavy gasps, and her eyes seemed distant, as if grappling with what she had just done. Amid the grim silence, Dokja stepped toward Hee-won, extending his hand to her. His gaze was steady as he helped her rise. The weight of the moment settled on everyone as Dokja's voice broke the silence. He reminded them that the scenario had only just begun. The following morning, Gyumho Station bore the marks of change. After the events of the previous night, the station was quieter, its once crowded space now noticeably emptier. Most of the survivors had chosen to leave, their paths diverging as they moved toward their own uncertain futures. Only 5 people remained aside from Dokja and his group. They were strong enough to have endured the trials of the night, and Dokja was certain they would manage on their own with the coins they still possessed. The atmosphere was different now, quieter but heavier with the weight of what lay ahead. instead. Among the group, Hee-won stood out, having seamlessly integrated herself as their newest ally. Han Myung-go, on the other hand, had disappeared without a trace, his absence raising no questions and leaving no void. For Dokja, it was simply time to move forward. As the group prepared to leave, Dokja took one last look around the station that had served as their refuge. With a single word, he signaled their departure. Together, they stepped out, their journey toward the next destination beginning. As they moved, Hee-won approached Dokja, lightly punching him on the arm. A notification flickered in Dokja's vision that you have received 1,500 coins from the character Hee-won. The gesture caught him off guard. Hee-won had distributed the coins from the previous night's battle, giving everyone their fair share, and now it was Dokja's turn. She explained that she had earned the most coins and would have felt guilty keeping them all to herself. Dokja couldn't help but think that he wouldn't have done the same if their roles were reversed, but Hee-won's actions reflected her character, one of fairness and camaraderie. As she lightly smacked him again, she teased him with her usual good-natured energy. Dokja grumbled about the pain, though it was clear the exchange had lightened the mood. The constellations were delighted as they observed the growing bond among these individuals. Dokja reflected quietly on the situation. The group had gained a significant number of coins after the intense battle from the previous night. As expected, Dokja himself had received the largest share, partly due to the constellation's interest in his actions. That morning, Baehyung, though reluctant, had handed over his share of the gifted coins. The total in Dokja's possession now stood at 23,050 coins, as indicated by the notification window that flickered before him. He couldn't help but think about how quickly the coins were spent. Just recently, he had invested a substantial amount, 4,400 coins, to increase his stats. Some were used to boost his mana, ensuring that he could continue utilizing the weapon aura of the White Star weapon. The process of spending coins felt far easier than earning them, a fact that weighed on him as he considered his next move. His strategy now involved increasing the level of Baehyung's channel to attract more constellations. If his plan worked, their interest would bring in additional coins. The group's next destination, the second main scenario, seemed like the perfect stage for this. As the group stepped into the tunnel that marked the second scenario, their visions were suddenly filled with a new message window. The objective was simple, but foreboding. Get through the tunnel and meet with the survivor of the first shelter zone. There was no time limit attached, but the clarity of the task left no room for doubt. The group paused briefly, processing the details. E1 questioned the meaning of a shelter zone, and Dokja explained calmly. Their next destination was Chungmuro Station, the primary shelter zone for this scenario. However, they hadn't traveled far before their path was blocked by a swarm of ground rats. The creatures came in waves, their numbers seemingly endless. The tunnel, dark and stifling, echoed with the sound of weapons striking flesh and the labored breaths of the group. Hee-won, covered in sweat and visibly fatigued, expressed her frustration aloud. 3 stations didn't sound far, but with the onslaught of monsters underground, the journey was anything but easy. After what felt like an eternity of fighting, Dokja decided it was time to rest. He noticed signs that other people had once been in this part of the tunnel, a few scattered belongings and marks of hastily abandoned supplies. He pointed this out to the group, suggesting they search for anything useful while catching their breath. Lee Hyun-sung voiced a suggestion to push forward without stopping. He reasoned that they only had one more station to go before reaching their destination. However, Dokja insisted on taking a rest, pointing out that they couldn't be certain they'd have the chance to rest once they arrived. His cautious nature urged him to prepare for the unexpected. The group advanced further, and at long last, a new platform came into view. The scene before them was grim and unsettling. The station they had just left, Yaksu, had been overrun with ground rats and littered with the corpses of the dead. But it wasn't just the rats that had caused the devastation. Observing the wounds on the bodies, Dokja deduced that the deaths weren't solely the result of fighting the creatures. This was undoubtedly the work of Jung-hyuk, a clear reminder that in this harsh new world, monsters weren't the only threats. Upon reaching the new platform, Lee Hyun-sung immediately offered to scout the area for anything useful. Dokja appreciated his practicality and reliability, silently acknowledging how invaluable Hyun-sung's military background was in situations like this. Meanwhile, Senga and Hee-won exchanged glances and seemed to agree on something. Dokja watched them with a hint of surprise as they prepared to head off together. When Hee-won noticed his expression, she questioned whether Dokja wanted to join them. Feeling slightly awkward, Dokja declined and encouraged the 2 women to go ahead without him. Hyun-sung, inspired by the idea of a break, announced his intention to visit the washroom, and Gil-young quickly followed suit. The 4 of them left in pairs, heading toward the facilities. Dokja remained behind, briefly watching their retreating figures before making a decision of his own. After some time, Hee-won looked around and noticed that Dokja was no longer with them. She questioned Hyun-sung, who casually informed her that Dokja had gone to check the area area outside the tunnel. Alarm flashed across Hee-won's face as she remembered a critical detail. The air outside was still poisonous, and Dokja seemed to have ignored that fact entirely. Dokja moved swiftly through the suffocating poisonous fog, his eyes locked on his destination, Dongguk University. The toxic air burned his lungs, but his resolve remained unshaken. This was no impulsive act. Dokja hadn't suggested resting at Dongguk University Station merely because the others were fatigued. There was another purpose, one rooted in his deep knowledge of the world's unfolding scenarios. According to the details he remembered, the next step in their journey lay just beyond exit 6 of Dongguk University Station. As he pressed forward, his eyes caught sight of something in the distance. His pace quickened. There it was, the statue of the great monk Samyang Dang, a towering figure of stone standing in quiet vigilance. A message flickered in Dokja's vision that a constellation wearing a robe is looking forward to the next action you will take. Back in the station, the others were left to speculate about Dokja's sudden departure. Hee-won questioned his reasoning, and Lee Hyun-sung relayed that Dokja had gone on what he called a pilgrimage. Hee-won's disbelief was evident, but there was no immediate way to follow him. Meanwhile, Dokja reached the base of the statue. The area was eerily silent, devoid of any signs of life. He stood before the imposing figure, clasping his hands together in a gesture of reverence. Messages began to light up his vision that a constellation wearing a robe is delighted with your actions. 100 coins have been sponsored. Without hesitation, Dokja summoned the purest sword force, channeling the energy into the blade of faith. With precision and determination, he struck the statue of Samyang Dang. The blade carved through the stone with terrifying force, shattering the once magnificent monument into rubble. Another notification appeared in his vision. A constellation wearing a robe is stunned by your actions. From above, Bi-hyung let out a frantic bellow. His disbelief at Dokja's actions was almost tangible, yet Dokja remained indifferent to the chaos he had just unleashed. The destruction of the statue was a calculated move, one that would undoubtedly shift the trajectory of the scenario. Minutes later, Dokja re-entered Dongguk University Station. He sat down and ate a ground rat he had prepared earlier, replenishing his energy in silence. Bi-hyung was fuming, his voice echoing with frustration. Dokja had just destroyed the idol of a powerful constellation, a bold and reckless act that sent shockwaves through the unseen realm. Bi-hyung's anger was palpable as he questioned Dokja's sanity, warning him of the potential consequences. Destroying the idol wasn't a small matter. It was a direct affront to a constellation's dignity and power. The Dokkaebi's concerns about his channel's reputation being ruined only heightened the tension, but Dokja remained unfazed, dismissing Bi-hyung's outburst with casual indifference, more focused on the task at hand than the consequences of his actions. Inwardly, Dokja reflected on the importance of his decision. Every idol held the sealed power of the constellation it represented. Breaking the seal could grant skills or items associated with the constellation. The skill he sought was critical for their next destination, Chungmoro. While the usual method of unlocking an idol's power required patience, Dokja had chosen a shortcut, a method revealed in the novel, bypassing the prolonged process entirely. Bi-hyung continued to rant, accusing Dokja of jeopardizing his channel's standing, especially with a powerful constellation like the bald leader of the peasants' army. But Dokja retorted calmly, pointing out the hypocrisy in Bi-hyung's words. Messages flashed in Dokja's vision, one from the constellation wearing a robe, outraged by his actions, and another from the prisoner of the golden headband, amused by the chaos. Returning to the group, Dokja was met with curiosity and concern. Lee Hyun-sung greeted him with relief, while Hee-won, ever sharp-tongued, teased him about his so-called pilgrimage. Her questions about whether he had visited a cathedral or temple carried a mocking undertone, but Dokja remained composed. Instead of engaging in the banter, Dokja presented Hee-won with an item, the robe of the great monk Samyang. The robe, imbued with the power of justice and will, was a relic of immense significance. Hee-won examined it skeptically, remarking on its tattered appearance and doubting its value. Dokja then introduced the history of the monk, though Hee-won seemed unimpressed, dismissing the name as unfamiliar. Next, Dokja handed the praying beads of the monk to Senga. These beads carried a powerful effect, enhancing the recovery of mana. Senga's eyes lit up with recognition as she spoke of the great monk Samyang, recounting her knowledge of him from her studies of Korean history. She explained that he was a monk from the mid-Joseon dynasty who played a pivotal role in defending Korea during the Japanese invasions. She mentioned his victories at the battles of Nowonpyeong and Ugwandong. Dokja nodded, using her enthusiasm to build on his story. He explained that the items he had presented, the robe and the prayer beads, were imbued with the power of the great monk Samyang. Senga's initial skepticism gave way to curiosity as she examined the relics, and Hee-won's interest deepened as she held the robe, sensing the power within it. Dokja continued, spinning his tale with shameless confidence. He told them that he had offered a prayer at the monk's statue out of curiosity, and the items had seemingly fallen from the sky. His words were accompanied by a flicker of a message in his vision. Some constellations were impressed by his audacity. Building on the narrative, Dokja claimed that the relics had been sent down by the great monk himself, as a divine gesture to protect Korea in its time of need, much like he had done during the invasion centuries ago. His tone was calm, but carried a conviction that made his words difficult to doubt. The group listened intently, their expressions shifting from surprise to agreement. Senga nodded thoughtfully, considering the parallels between the past and their current situation. She suggested that the great monk Samyang could very well be a constellation himself, her voice carrying a sense of wonder. Lee Hyun-song, ever the patriot, stiffened in respect, referring to the monk with reverence as though addressing a superior officer. Meanwhile, Baehyung watched the interaction in stunned silence, clearly disbelieving the brazenness of Dokja's fabrication. But as Dokja glanced at the system messages in his vision, he knew his gamble had worked. A new message revealed that the constellation wearing a robe had forgiven his earlier transgression. The same constellation had also revealed his nickname, the bald leader of the peasants' army. Internally, Dokja reflected on the nature of constellations. Their power and influence were closely tied to their fame and the reverence they received from others. Although his actions had been reckless, Dokja knew no constellation would pass up the opportunity to have their name praised and remembered. Hee-won briefly repeated the name of the great monk Samyang, committing it to memory as the group pressed forward. Dokja reminded everyone to prepare themselves. They were nearing Cheongmuro. Hee-won remarked on how the group had not encountered any ground rats so far, attributing their safe passage to Gil-young's ability to communicate with other species. Dokja acknowledged her observation but urged everyone to remain vigilant. He knew the path ahead wouldn't remain safe for long. Dokja's thoughts were fixed on their progress. They were about half a mile from Cheongmuro, and he anticipated trouble as the distance closed. His instincts proved correct when a notification rang in his vision. A new sub-scenario had appeared. The task was clear: escape the illusory prison within a 1-hour time limit. Before Dokja could fully process the scenario, he warned the group to stand back and keep their minds steady. As if on cue, a thick haze descended upon the tunnel, spreading rapidly. The fog blocked all visibility, creating a suffocating atmosphere. Within moments, the familiar surroundings were replaced with a warped, dreamlike distortion, as though the world itself had turned into a drug-induced nightmare. The party was separated by the overwhelming fog. Dokja tried to focus, but the distorted scenery disoriented him. He could no longer see his companions. His surroundings shifted unpredictably, as if the world was bending and twisting around him. Then, cutting through the eerie silence, he heard a voice. Faint but unmistakable. It was a voice from his past, one he had buried deep within the recesses of his memory. The illusion intensified. The landscape dissolved entirely, and in its place appeared a figure that Dokja instinctively recognized. His chest tightened as he stared, unable to deny the reality being forced upon him. A bitter smile crept across his face as the weight of the vision pressed down on him. The illusory prison was merciless, dragging out the most deeply buried traumas and amplifying them to break the mind. Just as the illusion threatened to overwhelm him, a system message appeared before his eyes. His personal skill, Fourth Wall, had activated. The message indicated that the skill granted him immunity to the effects of the illusory prison. The fog receded in his mind, and the distorted visions began to fade. He realized that the illusory prison, a cruel space designed to unravel its victims by forcing them to confront their darkest memories and deepest fears. Even someone like Jung-hyuk, the regressor with countless lifetimes of experience, would struggle here. This scenario was designed to exploit the mind's weaknesses, making it one of the most perilous trials for anyone to face. Dokja called out to the group, urging them to remain calm and breathe steadily. However, the fog had already begun to take its toll. Lee Hyun-sung was disoriented, unable to focus, while Hee-won screamed incoherently, lashing out at phantoms only she could see. Gil-yong, trembling and clutching his ears, apologized repeatedly, his voice choked with fear. Dokja cursed under his breath, realizing he was too late to prevent the prison's effects from taking hold. Then, amidst the distorted chaos, Senga's figure emerged. The beads of Samyang dangling on her wrist glowed faintly, creating a small barrier of clarity around her. The relic was working, its power shielding her from the worst of the illusion. Without hesitation, hesitation, Dokja rushed to Senga. He needed her help to dismantle the illusory prison. He asked her to cover him while he prepared to destroy the zone, and she nodded, steady despite the turmoil around them. Dokja's thoughts focused sharply on the skill he had obtained from the statue of the great monk. Destroying the idol had been a calculated risk, and now it was time to see if it would pay off. Activating his personal skill, Dispel Evil, Dokja unleashed its power. The energy surged outward, cutting through the oppressive fog. Slowly, the illusory prison began to unravel. As the haze retreated, his companions reappeared one by one. Lee Hyun-sung was on the ground, shouting an oath from his military training, his voice trembling with residual fear. Gil-young was curled up, his knees pressed against his chest as he muttered about his mother. Senga rushed to comfort Gil-young, her calm demeanor providing him with some reassurance. But Hee-won was not herself. Her eyes glowed a deep, unnatural red, a clear sign of demon slaying. She charged at the group with wild aggression, her blade swinging recklessly. The robe of the great monk Samyang had been given to her to counter such effects, but its protection had failed. Dokja reacted swiftly, stepping in to stop her rampage. A precise strike to the back of her neck rendered her unconscious, and she crumpled to the ground. He instructed Senga to tend to Hee-won, knowing she would need care to recover from the ordeal. A system message appeared in front of Dokja, confirming the successful completion of the sub-scenario. The notification announced that the group had earned a reward of 300 coins. However, Dokja knew better than to relax. The danger wasn't over yet. Unsheathing his sword, Dokja prepared for the next wave. As if summoned by the system's notification, monsters began to materialize. These creatures were a formless mass of liquid, their translucent, eerie shapes resembling ectoplasm. They were 8th grade specters, a ghost species. The specters were not particularly dangerous on their own, but they thrived in the environment of the illusory prison. Now that the prison had been dismantled, their strength was significantly reduced. Dokja moved swiftly, cutting down the creepy, amorphous creatures with precision. Their ethereal forms dissolved into nothingness under his blade. Meanwhile, Lee Hyun-sung began to recover from his earlier trauma. His disoriented state faded, and he slowly regained his composure. He groaned as he stood up, confused but alert. Senga approached him, her concern evident. She explained what had transpired, detailing how the group had encountered monsters capable of creating an illusory prison. Hyun-sung listened in disbelief as Senga mentioned that the battle had primarily been handled by Dokja. His gratitude was apparent, though his usual stoic demeanor masked most of his emotions. He thanked Dokja sincerely, acknowledging the effort it must have taken to protect everyone. Dokja dismissed the thanks with a simple reply, his focus already shifting to the spoils of the battle. He picked up a shimmering object from the remains of one of the specters, a rare spirit stone. This valuable item, known as a specter spirit stone, could only be obtained from the remains of these ghostly beings. Dokja inspected it briefly before tucking it away for future use. Gil-young stirred from his position on the ground, his small form trembling slightly as he woke. Senga quickly turned her attention to him, asking if he needed rest. Gil-young, however, shook his head, rubbing his temples and murmuring that his head hurt. Dokja gently stroked Gil-young's hair. He couldn't help but wonder if Gil-young had endured the most trauma among them. The boy clung to Dokja tightly, his small frame trembling as he sought comfort in the only anchor he had in this harsh world. Senga broke the silence, her voice carrying a hint of relief. She noted that they seemed to be nearing their destination. In the distance, a pale light flickered, cutting through the oppressive darkness of the tunnel. Dokja's mind raced as he assessed the situation. Their group was battered and far from ready for another confrontation. He questioned if it was safe for them to proceed, weighing the risks of moving forward against the dangers of lingering in the tunnel. His thoughts were interrupted by a sharp voice that echoed through the dimly lit space. The group turned toward the sound, startled. A blade glinted in the darkness, its presence a warning rather than a direct threat. A girl emerged from the shadows, her posture tense and commanding. She demanded to know who they were and what they were doing in the area. As she stepped closer, the girl's identity became apparent to Senga. Her realization sparked recognition. This was Lee Ji-hye, the sole survivor of Taepung Girls High School. Dokja observed her carefully, his mind already piecing together her significance. He knew her well from 3 ways to survive the apocalypse. Ji-hye wasn't just any survivor, she was a pivotal character in the story. Ji-hye questioned the group further, her blade flashing as she emphasized her authority. Her disbelief was clear. How could they have defeated the specters when only her master supposedly knew the method? Dokja maintained his calm, silently analyzing her as she spoke. He activated his character profile skill to confirm her details. She was 17 years old, supported by the god of naval warfare, and bore the attribute Scarred Sword Demon. Everything about her aligned with the story. Dokja's thoughts lingered on her importance. She was the reason Jung-yak would later prioritize reaching Chungmuro. Her role in the naval battle to come was crucial, and Dokja couldn't afford to lose her trust or cooperation. Without further hesitation, Jihei gestured for them to follow. As the group complied, a system message appeared before Dokja. The notification confirmed that the main scenario, the encounter, had been successfully completed. Dokja and his companions finally arrived at Chungmuro, a place that seemed to pulse with tension. They followed Lee Jihei through the chaotic streets, and as they entered the area, Senga took in the scene. Her eyes settled on the shattered screen door of the platform, the damage signaling the unrest that had gripped the world. Dokja, meanwhile, observed the situation closely. The number of dokkaebi channels had multiplied, a sign that the scenario was becoming more large-scale. He suspected that Bihyung must be struggling with the overwhelming influx of activity. As they moved through the area, a group of middle-aged men took notice of them. One of them, his tone casual, greeted them, referring to Lee Jihei as the little samurai. Dokja's thoughts immediately went to Jihei's supporting constellation, a being far more formidable than the man realized. If only he knew who backed her, he would regret that comment. Jihei, unfazed by the remark, simply sniffed and frowned, as if already weary of the man's presence. Another man in the group, with a grin, joked about the state of the world, commenting that there wasn't much else to do when everything had fallen apart. Then one of them addressed Senga, asking if she had come from Dongguk University, impressed by her appearance. He mentioned that he knew of a cheap room and asked if she was interested. Senga, confused and a little taken aback, asked for clarification. The man, realizing her lack of understanding, laughed even harder, his words implying the harsh realities of the new world. But Jihei, growing irritated, stepped in before the conversation could go further. She ordered the men to stop pestering the newcomers and to get upstairs. The men, not wanting to provoke Jihei further, shrugged and began to move away. One of them muttered that the newcomers would have to learn the ways of the world eventually, but Jihei made it clear that if they valued their lives, they would heed her words. The men disappeared into the transit line, and Jihei finally sheathed her sword. She turned to Dokja, her expression unreadable. She had done her part, but now it was his turn. She didn't want to babysit them any longer. Dokja wondered, with a touch of exasperation, if it would truly be so difficult for her to display just a bit more courtesy. As Jihei turned to walk away, her indifference was clear. However, Dokja stopped her, asking about Junghyuk. The moment his words reached Jihei, a wave of suspicion washed over her, causing her to turn back with a guarded look in her eyes. She questioned him of his identity. Dokja, observing her reaction, quickly pieced together the situation. It was clear to him that Junghyuk had already influenced her significantly. Considering the immense power of the god of naval warfare, Dokja understood why Junghyuk would have sought someone like Jihei, and if he were in Junghyuk's position, he would have sought out someone like Jihei as well. Dokja identified himself as someone who had survived alongside Junghyuk, hoping this would make her drop her guard, but Jihei's expression remained skeptical. Her sharp gaze lingered on Dokja, and she seemed unwilling to trust his words. Dokja reassured her that Junghyuk would recognize him if she relayed his name, but her response did little to ease his concern. She revealed that Master wasn't present at the moment. Hearing her call Junghyuk Master sparked unease in Dokja. He couldn't help but wonder what kind of relationship had developed between them. Jihei turned to a nearby boy, instructing him to watch Dokja and the group while she went to find Junghyuk. The boy hesitated, nervously asking who they were. Jihei admitted she didn't know, only that they claimed to be Master's friends. The boy's eyes lit up at the mention of Junghyuk, his nervousness replaced by excitement. He asked if they were truly Junghyuk's friends, and Dokja, with a calm assurance, confirmed it, leaving the boy both eager and curious as Jihei walked away. The boy enthusiastically explained how Junghyuk had become the leader of their group. His story was long-winded, and Dokja and the others began yawning from the monotony. The boy seemed disappointed, asking if they were even paying attention. Dokja, with a lack of enthusiasm, summarized that Junghyuk had appeared 3 days ago, saved him and Lee Jihei from a pack of monsters, and earned their loyalty. This, he pointed out, was the essence of the story. Dokja reflected inwardly, recognizing that the boy didn't realize Junghyuk's actions weren't out of kindness, but rather because he happened to be near Jihei at the time. Meanwhile, Hyunsung asked practical questions about their food supply. The boy admitted that most of the group relied on Jihei to hunt monsters, which Junghyuk would then cook. Hyunsung meticulously took notes, much to Dokja's confusion. When asked about drinking water, the boy explained that they traded food and coins with a group called the Landlord Coalition. This mention piqued Dokja's interest. As they were discussing, the middle-aged men from earlier returned, their attention once again on the group. They asked if the newcomers were looking for rooms. The boy quickly responded that they were only heading upstairs to use the bathroom. The men seemed disappointed but warned them to be cautious. Leaving the earlier encounter behind, Dokja and his companions continued onward. As they walked, Dokja recalled details about the Chungmuro Landlord coalition from 3 ways to survive the apocalypse. He knew their leader held control over all of Chungmuro and was likely one of the notorious 10 evils. This knowledge made him wary of the challenges ahead. Senga, noticing peculiar terms, asked about the rooms the men had mentioned earlier. The boy explained that the so-called rooms referred to designated green zones, areas critical to survival in this scenario. These zones, controlled mainly by the Landlord coalition, offered a semblance of order amidst the chaos. Other groups existed, but the coalition maintained a dominant monopoly over the lower levels. Curious about Junghyuk's role, Dokja inquired whether he had done anything to challenge the coalition. The boy admitted that Junghyuk had saved them but left them to fend for themselves afterward. This didn't surprise Dokja, who knew Junghyuk's nature well. The man's overwhelming power naturally attracted followers, but it was clear he hadn't asked for their loyalty. Dokja suspected Junghyuk's actions in this round were deviating from the original storyline, and he resolved to uncover what was different this time. Hyunsung's attention shifted to a crowd gathered further down the passage. The boy pointed out that the bathroom lay just beyond the group. As they approached the last passage, their pace slowed. Dozens of people were packed into the narrow space, forming a bottleneck that hinted at some form of tension or conflict ahead. The crowd in the passage was chaotic. Desperate voices pleaded with a figure named Pildu, begging to be allowed back into the green zone. They promised coins and vowed to follow his rules if he let them stay for just one more night. The man, unmoved, ordered them to stand back, his presence exuding control over the situation. Dokja carefully observed the scene, suspecting the presence of one of the 10 evils among the Landlord coalition members. However, the crowded and chaotic scene made it difficult to identify anyone specific. Amid the commotion, Gilyong slipped through the crowd. Dokja called out to him, but it was too late. Someone pushed Gilyong, causing him to lose his balance and fall to the ground. A system message immediately appeared, warning that Gilyong had trespassed on private property. The atmosphere shifted dramatically. Members of the Landlord coalition near the front turned their attention to Gilyong. One of them approached, eyeing the boy with disdain. The man mocked Gilyong, asking if he even knew where he was. The situation grew tense as the crowd screamed and retreated in panic. Fear rippled through them as they whispered warnings, their reactions hinting at the danger ahead. Gilyong, confused, asked if this was the way to the bathroom. The man smirked, confirming it had once been, but now it was controlled territory. With a patronizing tone, the man stroked Gilyong's head and remarked that trespassing was a mistake. He decided to teach the boy a valuable life lesson. Suddenly, a mechanical whirring sound filled the air. Miniature turrets resembling Gatling guns emerged from the ground, their presence signaling imminent danger. The man's voice was cold and commanding as he demanded payment. A system notification announced that Pildugong's Stigma, militarized zone level 3, had been activated. It demanded a payment of 500 coins for trespassing. The warning was clear. All turrets in the area would open fire if the payment was not made. Pildu's henchmen stared down at Gilyong, his voice cold and demanding. The loaded turrets, menacing and ready to fire, were all trained on the boy. Dokja immediately stepped forward, instructing Senga to look after Heewon. He positioned himself protectively behind Gilyong, drawing the henchman's attention. The man's gaze shifted to Dokja, assuming he was the boy's guardian. With a smirk, he demanded the payment from Dokja instead. Dokja silently noted the absurdity of demanding such a high amount for merely stepping on land. He found it intriguing how Junghyuk had allowed this kind of corruption to fester. Dokja recognized the name Pildugong, known in TWSA as the Armament Lord of Chungmuro, one of the infamous 10 evils. Each round of Junghyuk's regression altered the appearance and ranks of the 10 evils, but their notorious roles as antagonists remained constant. Pildu's dominion over this territory was evident from the size of his green zone, which far exceeded that of others. Addressing the henchmen, Dokja questioned why they were collecting coins in a public facility like Chungmuro Station. The man laughed, explaining that the station had ceased to be a public space 8 days ago. Now it was under their control. Without hesitation, Dokja agreed to pay, but insisted on giving the coins directly to Pildugong. His declaration caught the man off guard. Dokja calmly pointed out that the the person in front of him wasn't Pildu Gong. Inwardly, Dokja assessed the situation. These men were former landlords of Chungmoro, now reduced to being Pildu Gong's enforcers. Together, they formed the Landlord Coalition, serving their leader's ruthless agenda. The man standing before Dokja was taken aback, confused by Dokja's bold demand. Dokja's gaze remained steady as he addressed Pildu Gong directly, pushing past the henchman's confusion. Suddenly, a message popped up, notifying that Dokja had trespassed on private property. The turrets aimed at him, but Dokja didn't flinch. He called out again, louder this time. From behind a bench stacked with supplies, a middle-aged man, reading a magazine, eyed Dokja coldly. The atmosphere grew tense. This was Pildu Gong, the armament lord. Pildu warned Dokja to stop, threatening him with deadly consequences if he took another step forward. Dokja's mind raced. Pildu's sharpness was clear, and with his 2 personal attributes and high mana level, it was no wonder he was one of the 10 evils. Dokja considered his options. Pildu wasn't just a mindless thug, he was a formidable opponent. Should he negotiate, or was it better to deal with him now? Pildu's smile widened as his troops began to surround Lee Hyun-song. A quick response from Pildu's men made it clear they were prepared for any conflict. Dokja chuckled, raised both hands in a calm gesture, attempting to ease the tension. To him, it was simply the way things worked. Tenants needed to deal with the landlord. Pildu stared at Dokja, a smirk playing on his lips as he posed the question. He had no interest in making room for outsiders in his green zone. When Dokja requested a space for himself and his companions, Pildu refused outright, stating the price was steep, 500 coins per person per day. Dokja's mind boiled with disdain for Pildu's greed. He had hoped for a better response, but Pildu was typical of the landlords in this twisted world. With no other choice, Dokja made a proposal. He couldn't afford the price, but he had something else to offer: intel about Junghyuk. The mention of Junghyuk caught the attention of Pildu's gang. They were clearly unsettled, their eyes narrowed, suspicion rising as they muttered among themselves. Junghyuk's name was not one to be taken lightly, especially among the Landlord Coalition. Dokja's strategy was paying off. He had hit the bullseye. In the original story, Junghyuk was in a fierce conflict with the Coalition, and Dokja wondered what he could be up to now. Pildu's expression darkened, his gaze turning to Dokja like a predator eyeing its prey. The question came, sharp and threatening. How did he know Junghyuk? Dokja remained unfazed, offering a simple explanation. He claimed to have been through life and death experiences with Junghyuk, making him a close companion. Pildu's skepticism was clear, but Dokja didn't need him to believe it just to make a deal. Pildu wasn't easily fooled, however. He made it clear that he had been burned by people like Dokja before, those who skipped out on payments after receiving favors. Dokja saw the opening, ready to walk away, letting the tension build. Pildu, unable to resist, called out to stop him. The trap had been set, and Dokja smiled inwardly, but it wasn't about the trap he had set, it was about the money. As Pildu demanded payment, Dokja pressed him, feigning confusion over the amount. Pildu quickly raised the price, changing it to 1,000 coins for both him and the child with him. Dokja cursed inwardly. The situation had taken a turn for the worse, and it all boiled down to money. Pildu was a ruthless bastard, and even the dokkaebi hadn't scammed him this badly. The greedy landlord had raised the price to an absurd level, showing no remorse. Dokja told Pildu the price was too steep, but Pildu simply grinned, clearly enjoying the confrontation. He issued a final warning, his intentions clear. He was ready to end things. The turret's click was followed by a blazing shot of fire, aiming straight at Dokja. Senga screamed his name in fear, but Hyunsong acted quickly, pushing Gilyoung aside and urging everyone to run toward the crowd. The turret's fire was relentless, and as the shot neared, Dokja braced himself for the impact. But just as the fire was about to strike, a shield materialized in front of him. Hyunsong had stepped in, gripping the shield tightly, though it was clear he couldn't hold it for long. Dokja called out to Hyunsong. Hyunsong responded, his voice strained, knowing he wouldn't be able to hold the defense much longer. Dokja's mind raced as he assessed the situation. Hee-won was still unconscious, and if they fought here, someone would likely end up dead. It was clear there was nothing to gain from continuing this fight. He called out to Pildu, trying to negotiate. He warned Pildu that attacking now would be a fatal mistake. Pildu's response was cold, questioning why he should heed Dokja's advice. Dokja delivered his warning with calm conviction. If Pildu decided to fight, he wouldn't leave this place alive. Pildu's expression hardened, and though he didn't say anything, he could sense something had shifted. The presence of someone approaching was undeniable, and Dokja noticed it too. The moment was thick with tension as Pildu's gang began to grow uneasy. Jihei shouted with urgency as she pointed at Dokja, recognizing him as the one who claimed to be a companion. Her words echoed through the tense air, and Dokja saw a figure descending the escalator, none other than Junghyuk. A notification appeared in Dokja's mind, reinforcing the unease lingering in Junghyuk's thoughts. Despite the gravity of the moment, Dokja couldn't help but smile. He hadn't expected to feel relief at seeing Junghyuk again, but here he was. Lee Jihei and Gong Pildu stared at the pair, unable to hide their shock. They had never imagined that Dokja, of all people, would be aligned with Junghyuk. It was a moment that left both of them momentarily speechless. Caught in disbelief, Dokja couldn't resist speaking up. He greeted Junghyuk casually, but the meaning behind them was clear. Dokja noticed the subtle tension in Junghyuk's posture, the way his gaze flickered briefly with confusion. Junghyuk was stunned and confused as he stared at him. Dokja's tone shifted as he addressed the stunned onlookers. He turned to Junghyuk, asking for his help in proving their bond to Pildu and his gang inside. Dokja knew Junghyuk well. Despite his cold and ruthless demeanor, he kept his promises. He could kill without hesitation, but when it came to agreements, he never broke his word, especially now with the eyes of many constellations watching their every move. Dokja could sense their anticipation, messages flashing across his vision. A few constellations, including the demon-like Judge of Fire, were observing Junghyuk's loyalty. Junghyuk hesitated. He tried to speak, but Dokja, never one to leave things unspoken, added a small but important request. He asked if Junghyuk could also make sure they were allowed to use the toilet, a request that seemed almost absurd in the current situation. The onlookers were stunned as he talked over Junghyuk. Finally, Junghyuk made his move. He drew his blade, a silent decision that spoke volumes. Pildu, sensing the imminent danger, finally relented. He didn't want to fight, and with the blade now pointed at him, he chose to let Dokja and his companions go for the time being, unwilling to escalate things further. Dokja couldn't help but appreciate the turn of events. He turned to Junghyuk, a lighthearted grin on his face, acknowledging how fortunate he was to have such a powerful ally by his side. Junghyuk's response was brief, acknowledging that Dokja had somehow managed to stay alive this long. Dokja, always quick with a quip, teased Junghyuk, wondering if the great hero had wanted him dead. Junghyuk's response, as blunt and indifferent as ever, made it clear that to him, Dokja's survival wasn't much of a concern. Dokja's mind churned with irritation as he looked at Junghyuk. The thought of socking him square in the jaw was tempting, but the reality of Junghyuk's overwhelming stats quickly grounded him. Despite the frustration, Dokja knew better than to act on impulse. Deciding to gather more information, Dokja activated his personal skill to access Junghyuk's character profile. With the full version now available, the details startled him. The man standing before him seemed even more formidable than he had been during his third regression in 3 ways to survive the apocalypse. As Junghyuk's cold voice cut through the air, questioning Dokja's lingering gaze, Dokja's thoughts deepened. He wondered why Junghyuk, despite his immense strength, seemed to be taking even greater risks than usual. There was an underlying scheme, an agenda that didn't align with the Junghyuk he had read about in the novel. What exactly was this regressor plotting in his third round? Junghyuk repeated his question, his tone sharp and impatient. Dokja deflected the tension with a sarcastic remark, masking his growing unease. As Junghyuk assessed Dokja, his thoughts betrayed a mixture of recognition and irritation. To him, Dokja seemed as determined as ever, but there was something about the man's demeanor that was starting to wear thin. A fleeting thought crossed Junghyuk's mind that should he just kill this bothersome companion? Dokja, privy to these dangerous musings thanks to his ability to read Junghyuk's thoughts, silently cursed the regressor's unpredictable nature. Still, he maintained his outward composure, quipping with forced lightness. A system message interrupted the interaction, announcing the disappointment of the constellation, prisoner of the golden headband. Dokja brushed it aside, but the exchange only grew more strained. Junghyuk shifted the conversation, commenting on Dokja's new companions. Another message appeared before Dokja, revealing that Junghyuk too was disappointed in him. The sudden judgment caught Dokja off guard, and his confusion deepened. Why was Junghyuk dissatisfied? What had he done wrong? Junghyuk activated his skill, Eye of the Sage at level 8, and scrutinized Dokja's companions. His thoughts turned to Lee Hyunsong, whom he had entrusted to Dokja. Hyunsong, despite his potential, appeared far weaker than Junghyuk had expected. The regressor's disappointment grew. To Junghyuk, it was clear that Hyunsong would have been stronger had he remained by his side instead of accompanying Dokja. Dokja, still reading Junghyuk's thoughts, felt the weight of the comparison. He acknowledged the truth in Junghyuk's assessment. Hyunsong might indeed have reached greater heights under Junghyuk's guidance. Yet Dokja reminded himself of his own role in this narrative. He wasn't a regressor or a hero. He was an ordinary reader who just happened to know the future. center. At that moment, Junghyuk's gaze froze as he scanned the surroundings. For the first time, a hint of confusion flickered in his usually composed eyes. Dokja noticed the shift and tried to discern who had caught Junghyuk's attention. He considered the possibilities but couldn't be sure. We were all standing close together, making it difficult to tell. Dokja felt the urge to ask but hesitated. Asking directly would reveal that he was reading Junghyuk's thoughts, something he wanted to avoid. Hee-won broke the silence with sharpness, her expression defiant as she addressed Junghyuk. Her reaction drew the regressor's attention away, and Dokja silently praised her for stepping in at the perfect moment. However, he knew that Junghyuk's inner turmoil wasn't over. The regressor's thoughts briefly flickered toward violence, but Dokja quickly interjected to redirect the conversation. Turning the focus elsewhere, Dokja asked Junghyuk why he was letting Pildugong remain unchecked. Junghyuk's response was curt, stating that a prophet should already know the answer. Dokja admitted he didn't know everything, and a notification confirmed that Junghyuk had activated his lie detection skill. The result indicated that Dokja was telling the truth. Junghyuk acknowledged the limits of Dokja's knowledge, explaining that he needed Pildugong alive. Dokja pieced together the reasoning, recognizing that Pildugong's role was critical for a future scenario. However, Dokja pointed out a flaw in Junghyuk's approach. While Pildugong might be necessary, his gang was not. It wasn't like Junghyuk to allow unnecessary chaos, yet he had left Pildu's group unchecked. Dokja pressed him further, questioning why he hadn't handled the situation more decisively. Junghyuk paused for a moment, clearly irritated by the persistent questioning. The tension between them grew palpable, but instead of answering directly, Junghyuk dismissed Dokja's concerns as beneath him. He turned to leave, declaring that he was too busy for such trivial matters. Dokja's frustration boiled over as he called after Junghyuk, trying to make him understand the stakes. If Junghyuk continued to ignore the situation, the people in Chungmuro would pay the price. But Junghyuk remained unmoved, coldly stating that it didn't concern him. His indifference struck a nerve, and Dokja clenched his fists tightly, barely containing his anger. For a fleeting moment, Dokja considered confronting Junghyuk physically, even asking himself if he could land a punch on the regressor. Junghyuk, as if sensing the thought, turned back with a calm yet challenging expression. The silent tension between them was almost unbearable, but Dokja knew better than to act on impulse. Without another word, Junghyuk signaled to Lee Jae, and the two began walking away, leaving Dokja standing there with unresolved frustration. As they disappeared into the distance, a system notification appeared, marking the countdown that only 1 hour and 30 minutes remained until the third scenario would begin. Dokja considered the situation, his thoughts swirling with irritation and resolve. The third scenario was set to last exactly 1 week, and Junghyuk undoubtedly had his own plans for that time. Whatever the regressor was plotting, it was something that could tip the scales in his favor. Dokja couldn't allow it to happen, yet he felt a twinge of resentment. Junghyuk, that insufferable bastard, always seemed several steps ahead. Hee-won's voice interrupted his train of thought. She mentioned that Dokja seemed a little scared while speaking to Junghyuk earlier. Dokja attempted to brush it off, laughing awkwardly and denying her claim, but his attention quickly shifted to a more pressing matter: Pildugong and his gang. They were a problem that needed solving. From what Dokja knew, Pildu and his followers had claimed ownership of public spaces, charging people rent to pass through or stay. Their greed and exploitation couldn't go unchecked. However, Pildugong wasn't just a nuisance. He was also necessary. To complete the third scenario, the group would need Pildu's cooperation, but if he refused to help, it could jeopardize everything. Dokja's frustration grew as he mulled over the situation. Hee-won, on the other hand, had no patience for diplomacy. She boldly declared her intention to confront Pildu head-on, certain they could win if they joined forces. Dokja, observing her determination, dismissed the idea outright. Direct confrontation wouldn't work. His gaze shifted to her weapon, realizing that it wouldn't be enough against Pildu's defenses. The group needed better equipment if they were to face future challenges. Hee-won, undeterred, activated her personal skill, the Time of Judgment. Her confidence faltered as the skill refused to activate. A notification appeared, informing them that the constellations of the Pure Good alignment remained silent, and her request for assistance had been denied. The skill had been cancelled. Confusion filled Hee-won's face. She wondered aloud why her skill had failed. To her, Pildugong and his gang were undoubtedly evil. Their exploitative behavior made them villains in her eyes. eyes. Yet the skill refused to acknowledge them as such. Dokja knew the reason. The time of judgment skill, tied to her judge of evil attribute, was immensely powerful, capable of turning the tide of any battle. But it had a significant limitation. It only worked on individuals who were deemed evil by universal standards. From their perspective, Pildu and his gang were oppressors, but the skill didn't recognize them as such. This disparity left Hee-won visibly frustrated, but Dokja, calm as always, explained the situation. The standards of justice upheld by the constellations often differed from those of humans. Justice was not an absolute concept. It was something defined by the majority's agreement. Hee-won, shaken by this revelation, questioned how such a thing could be true. Dokja reassured her that there might still be a way to deal with Pildugong, although it would be far from easy. Pildugong's most dangerous asset was his stigma, militarized zone, a defensive skill that allowed him to dominate within a designated area. The turrets within his zone would protect him from any threat, but outside this area, his strength would diminish significantly. The key to defeating him lay in luring him out of this safe zone. However, this was easier said than done. Pildugong had turned his domain into an impenetrable fortress. With blankets, food, and even a makeshift toilet, he had prepared himself for a prolonged standoff. He was effectively staging a sit-in within the largest room in Chungmuro, refusing to leave the space he controlled. As Dokja pondered their next move, a notification interrupted their discussion, announcing that only 1 hour remained until the activation of the third scenario. The group stood, their minds set on securing a strategy, but their movement caused a ripple of unease among the other survivors in the station. The people nearby flinched, their fear palpable. A man clutching a knife stood guard over a small single-person room on the platform. His eyes darted nervously as he tried to protect his claimed space. The tension in the air was suffocating, but Dokja shifted his focus to more immediate concerns. Pildugong could wait, for now they needed to find their own safe place. A room where they could survive the coming trials. Suddenly, Bahyong appeared, his lively and mocking tone cutting through the tension. The dokkaebi grinned, clearly relishing the scene before him. With a snap of his fingers, glowing message windows materialized in front of every survivor. The main scenario was unveiled. Green Zone. The objective was clear. Occupy a green zone within the station and survive the monsters that would emerge each night at midnight. The scenario would last for 7 days, and the survivors' success would hinge on their ability to secure and defend a safe area. Bahyong addressed the survivors with a mischievous grin, his voice loud and clear. The rules were simple. Occupy a green zone before anyone else or risk losing everything. Stealing another person's green zone was fair game too. The dokkaebi's warning was ominous. Anyone left without a green zone by midnight would face dire consequences. With a mocking farewell, Bahyong wished them luck before vanishing. The crowd's mood shifted instantly. Expressions hardened and fear gave way to desperation. Screams echoed across the station, each voice tinged with terror and resolve. Chaos erupted as people turned on each other, shouting and striking without hesitation. One man screamed, his voice cracking as he swung his weapon. This wasn't just a story anymore. The struggle was real and everyone knew it. Amidst the growing violence, Senga's voice trembled as she asked if they would have to fight like the others. Dokja reassured her, his tone calm and calculated. Fighting wasn't necessary. Not yet. All they needed was to find a green zone large enough to accommodate them. Dokja's thoughts raced. Green zones came in varying sizes, with some barely large enough for one person and others, like Pildugong's, capable of holding up to 70. Finding one suitable for their group would be a challenge, especially with the chaos spreading rapidly. Taking charge, Dokja proposed they split up to search for a room. He paired Senga with Lee Hyunsong and Hee-won with Gil-yong, assigning each pair to different areas of the station. As for himself, Dokja chose to search alone. They agreed to regroup 20 minutes before the scenario began if no one found anything. The group scattered quickly, each heading to their assigned location. Hee-won and Gil-yong descended to the B2 level, while Senga and Lee Hyunsong moved toward B3. Dokja stood still for a moment, watching them leave before pulling out his smartphone. Opening 3 ways to survive the apocalypse, Dokja's eyes scanned the familiar text, and a single line confirmed his worst fear. There were no rooms left in Chungmuro. His suspicions were correct. Finding a green zone wasn't an option anymore. This left only one path forward, a path Dokja was hesitant to take. Could they truly bring themselves to take innocent lives to secure their survival? His companions were good people. Would they be able to make such a choice if it came to that? The platform on line 3 was already drenched in blood. The chaos left dozens dead or injured as desperate survivors fought over the single remaining green zone. With no strong individuals present, even the weak refused to back down, clawing and striking at one another with whatever weapons they could find. The chilling cry of survival drowning out reason and morality. Dokja observed the chaos unfolding around him with a calm exterior, his mind focused elsewhere. Amid the turmoil, a message appeared in his vision, detached and indifferent. It reminded him there were only 30 minutes remaining before the third scenario would begin. Time was ticking, but Dokja didn't flinch. Instead, he immersed himself in reading 3 Ways to Survive the Apocalypse, a lifeline in a world teetering on destruction. As he read, Byung, overseeing the scenario, interrupted his concentration. The dokkaebi's frustrated voice carried a mix of disbelief and irritation, questioning Dokja's calm demeanor in such a critical moment. Meanwhile, the voices of the constellations echoed around him, their dissatisfaction palpable. The constellation Prisoner of the Golden Headband expressed curiosity about Dokja's seemingly odd behavior, their tone laced with frustration. Dokja instinctively turned off his smartphone, shielding its contents from prying eyes. He knew it wouldn't serve him well if Byung or the constellations discovered his secret, that he was a reader of 3 Ways to Survive the Apocalypse. The knowledge he possessed was his greatest advantage, and it needed to remain hidden. Byung continued to berate Dokja, questioning why he appeared to be staring at nothing. Dokja turned his phone back on and nonchalantly showed it to the dokkaebi, pretending to comply. Byung's exasperation deepened, as if he couldn't comprehend Dokja's lack of urgency. To the dokkaebi, it seemed like Dokja was brainstorming without purpose, a dangerous choice in the middle of such chaos. But Dokja's thoughts were elsewhere. Analyzing the situation with precision, he realized that neither the constellations nor the dokkaebi, who wielded immense administrative power, could see what was displayed on his screen. If they could, they would have already called attention to it. This revelation made him question the source of his unique advantage. Just how powerful was the author who had sent him this novel? The implications were staggering. His train of thought was interrupted by a blood-curdling scream, piercing through the commotion like a final note of despair. It marked the end of the struggle. The owner of the room on platform line 3 had finally been determined. The boy looked at Dokja, bewildered and alarmed, his body language screaming a warning not to come any closer. Dokja, unfazed, calmly reassured him that he had no intention of taking his spot. Lee Ji-hye, standing nearby, watched the exchange with a sharp grin, her tone laced with amusement. She remarked on how laid back Dokja seemed, almost as if he had no desire to survive. Dokja, matching her energy, noted that she seemed just as relaxed as he was, a comment that only made her smile grow wider. Ji-hye confidently stated that no one dared approach her room, fully aware of the consequences if they did. Her reputation for strength was well established, and her confidence was not misplaced. Dokja, observing her demeanor, reflected silently. The only individuals capable of challenging someone like Ji-hye were the members of the Landlord coalition, or even more likely, Jung-hyuk himself. Shifting her tone slightly, Ji-hye admitted she didn't want Dokja to die, surprising him with a backhanded compliment about how he had stood up to her master earlier. Dokja, maintaining his calm exterior, reassured her that he had no intention of dying. He added almost casually that finding a room wasn't necessary to survive the night. Ji-hye's curiosity deepened. She questioned whether Dokja was truly that strong, even going so far as to compare him to her master. Before Dokja could respond, Jung-hyuk appeared behind Ji-hye, his presence commanding the scene effortlessly. Without hesitation, he instructed Ji-hye to return to her room. Her demeanor changed instantly, her obedience to Jung-hyuk unwavering as she left without protest. Once she was gone, Jung-hyuk turned his attention to Dokja. He warned him that facing the monsters without proper preparation would only lead to his death, and the deaths of his companions. Dokja, however, remained unshaken. He simply stated that they would see how things played out, refusing to concede to Jung-hyuk's grim prediction. Jung-hyuk, perhaps seeing no point in continuing the discussion, left without another word. Shortly after, Dokja's companions regrouped, Hee-won's frustration boiling over as she ranted about the exorbitant demand of 2,000 coins per night for a room. Her fiery temper flared as she cursed the greed of those controlling the rooms, expressing her anger at their audacity. Sanga followed, quieter but clearly disheartened, admitting they hadn't been able to secure any shelter. Hyunsong, ever practical, directed his question to Dokja, seeking any useful information he might have discovered. Dokja, maintaining his usual calm, admitted that he hadn't found anything either. Dokja calmly explained that they had 2 options moving forward. The first option, he began, was the easier path, one where they could all survive. The idea immediately caught the attention of Hee-won, who, with a tone of skepticism, remarked that in such situations, people often ended up choosing the second option instead. She asked what the other option was. Without hesitation, Dokja elaborated. The second option, he stated, would be much more difficult, and there was a real risk that one of them might not make it through. Lee Hyunsong, pragmatic as always, suggested that if the first option guaranteed survival for everyone, then it was the one they should choose. Hee-won nodded in agreement, but Senga, more cautious, asked Dokja to explain both options first. Dokja pointed toward a nearby room occupied by another group. He explained that the first option involved taking over that room. The space could house 5 people, and the stats of those inside weren't particularly high. A few of them would be enough to overpower the occupants. Hee-won's frustration flared at this suggestion. She interrupted him, alarmed, questioning if Dokja was seriously proposing what she thought he was. Dokja confirmed without hesitation. The first option was to kill the occupants of the room and claim it as their own. Gil-yong, undeterred by the gravity of the suggestion, boldly declared that he would go along with the plan if Dokja was willing to do it. The boy's determination unsettled Senga, who quickly tried to dissuade him. Hee-won, visibly frustrated, admitted that the thought had crossed their minds before. She acknowledged the grim reality of their situation, but pushed back against the idea. Dokja reasoned that the current occupants of the room had likely taken it by killing others. If their group didn't adopt a similar approach, they wouldn't survive the scenarios to come. However, Hee-won's voice grew firm as she addressed him. She revealed that she had already killed many at Gumho Station, a decision she had made on her own and didn't regret. But she emphasized that taking a life didn't mean she enjoyed it. She didn't want to become a monster. Hyunsung, maintaining his calm demeanor, asked Dokja to explain the second option in detail. Dokja took a moment, closing his eyes briefly before deciding. He informed the group that they would proceed with the second option. Hee-won, still on edge, reacted immediately, expressing her frustration. She accused Dokja of testing them unnecessarily. Dokja, however, assured her that testing them wasn't his intention. Turning to Gil-yong, he spoke gently, saying he would have respected the boy's choice, no matter which path he decided on. With a reassuring gesture, Dokja stroked Gil-yong's hair, signaling his support. With the decision finalized, Dokja addressed the group. Now that everyone had agreed on the second option, he stressed that they had to follow his instructions without question. He emphasized the importance of trusting him, no matter how strange his plan seemed. If they failed to follow his guidance, it would mean certain death for all of them. As the countdown ticked away, only 5 minutes remained before the main scenario was set to begin. Dokja began explaining the plan. He predicted that the monsters would spawn in a specific direction. Once unleashed, they would rampage through the station, heading toward the ground floor. Fighting them from their current location would be impossible, as it would only result in their deaths. Instead, Dokja proposed splitting up. He instructed Hyunsung, Senga, and Hee-won to trust him completely and follow his plan precisely. When the monsters spawned, Dokja told them they needed to run directly toward the creatures. This declaration startled Hee-won, who questioned whether Dokja meant for them to head straight into danger instead of fleeing toward the safer area of Dongguk University Station. Dokja confirmed this, emphasizing the importance of timing. They had to begin running only after the monsters appeared. Picking up a stone, Dokja demonstrated the start of his plan. He threw the stone at the barrier, blocking the tunnel, causing it to crackle and vanish, clearing the path. Without hesitation, Dokja hoisted Gil-yong onto his back and gave the signal to run. At Dokja's command, Hyunsung, Senga, and Hee-won sprang into action, running straight toward the spawning zone. As they moved, the creatures began to emerge in the red zone. The first wave consisted of grade 9 ground rats, their numbers overwhelming. Soon they were joined by stronger intermediate grade 9 species known as grolls, hulking underground monsters with a fearsome presence. Senga was the first to spot it, green tiles shimmering faintly on the wall ahead. Her hand instinctively reached out, and as her fingers touched the surface, the tiles emitted a brilliant light. The moment of enlightenment came with a notification. Reacting swiftly, Hee-won turned and touched the wall behind her. Another light appeared, followed by another notification. However, Lee Hyunsung hesitated. He was weighed down by the relentless ground rats clinging to his shield, their claws scratching furiously. He struggled to move as the creatures piled on. Senga, quick to act, threw a makeshift rope toward him. With her and Hee-won's combined strength, Hyunsung was pulled forward. He soared through the air, breaking free of the rats, and managed to touch the wall. Behind them, Senga called out to Dokja, her voice filled with urgency. But Dokja didn't respond. He was already sprinting ahead, carrying Gil-yong on his back. In his mind, Dokja recalled the crucial details of the scenario. The third main scenario had a hidden layer. Green zones weren't confined to rooms as everyone initially believed. Certain surfaces would reveal green zones once the scenario was activated. Walls of all places were another place they could appear. Dokja's thoughts raced. There were only 2 hidden green zones along line 3, and he had already found one. The second zone had to be close, somewhere up ahead. He couldn't afford to slow down now. Amid the chaos of the station, Dokja's eyes caught sight of a boy standing just a dozen meters away. The boy's expression was frozen in terror, his gaze locked on the relentless wave of ground rats swarming toward him. Dokja's thoughts betrayed a darker practicality. He considered simply taking the boy's room for himself. It was, after all, the easier path. Suddenly the air shifted as Baehyung, the dokkaebi overseeing the scenario, erupted in laughter. His voice echoed through the space, amused by the unfolding events. The system responded to his delight with ominous messages that a scenario penalty has been added. Some existing green zones will be disabled. The effect was immediate. The green zone protecting the boy vanished in an instant. The ground rats lunged at him without hesitation, tearing through his small frame. Blood sprayed in every direction as his agonized cries filled the air. Dokja's steps didn't falter. The horrifying sight had bought him enough time to reach the passage ahead. Carrying Gilyong on his back, he pushed forward, only to find his path blocked by monsters emerging from the shattered screen doors. Quickly, Dokja pulled Gilyong behind him and unsheathed Unbroken Faith. The sword's blade glimmered with a force of pure power as he slashed through the incoming creatures. The monsters fell one after another, but the onslaught seemed endless. Dokja's thoughts drifted to Junghyuk. To survive an onslaught like this for even a day, Junghyuk must truly be a monster. He wondered briefly if he could do the same, even if he spent every coin he had to boost his stats. But the doubt lingered. He wasn't sure if he could match such a feat. As Dokja fought, Gilyong spoke, his voice breaking through the noise. Dokja dismissed him at first, focused on the relentless monsters. Gilyong's question came hesitantly, but with a weight that struck Dokja. He asked why Dokja was going out of his way to help them when he could have survived far more easily on his own. The answer wasn't clear, even to Dokja himself. For a moment he hesitated, unsure if there was a concrete reason behind his actions. Elsewhere, Senga and Hee-won were fighting their own battles. Senga's concern for Dokja and Gilyong was evident as she wondered aloud if they were all right. Hee-won, unable to see through the swarm of monsters, could only grit her teeth in frustration. Dokja gripped his sword tightly, slashing through the swarm of ground rats. The blade moved with precision, carving the creatures apart as he pushed forward. He paused briefly to lift Gilyong back onto his back. Carrying Gilyong, Dokja's thoughts flickered. He acknowledged that it would have been easier to go alone, to keep all the rewards for himself. But a distant memory surfaced, of a story he had once read. A protagonist had made the same selfish choice, and it had led to ruin. In his mind, Dokja admitted the truth. He was not a protagonist, nor was he destined to be a hero or savior. But one thing was certain, Gilyong would not die. Not today. Dokja instructed to hold on tight, his voice steady as he activated his personal skill, Bookmark. The ability wrapped his body in Kim Nam-woon's blackening, a dark and fierce power. The aura pushed away the monsters in his path, but it didn't shield him entirely. Fangs and claws bit into his body, and the ground rats tore into his thighs. Pain radiated through him, but he didn't stop. He ran forward, relentless and unyielding. Finally, the original wall came into view. Its surface shimmered faintly, marking the presence of a green zone. Dokja jumped over the remaining rats, landing in front of the zone that could accommodate 2 people. Relief flickered for a moment before the system message appeared of a green zone, but someone was already inside. Dokja froze, his eyes narrowing as he stared at the figure within the zone. It was a man he recognized immediately, a man who shouldn't have been there. Junghyuk, the protagonist of the novel, stood within the safety of the green zone. Dokja called out to him, his frustration barely contained. He asked Junghyuk to move, reasoning that Junghyuk didn't need the protection of the zone to survive. But Junghyuk dismissed the plea, feigning exhaustion and indifference. Dokja's thoughts churned with irritation. He couldn't understand how Junghyuk, only on his 3rd round, had already discovered this hidden area. In the original story, Junghyuk had only used a secret green zone during his 4th regression. Dokja's hands itched to lash out, but he restrained himself. With no other option, Dokja made another demand. If Junghyuk wouldn't move, then at least take Gilyong into the zone. After a tense moment, Junghyuk agreed, reaching out to take the child. Gilyong resisted, his urgency breaking through his fear as he called called out to Dokja. He tried to rush back to him, but Jung-hyuk's firm hand held him in place. Dokja turned away from the green zone and faced the approaching swarm of ground rats. The constellation known as the Bald General of Justice closed his eyes, while the demon-like Judge of Fire observed Dokja with an uncomfortable intensity. Jung-hyuk's gaze wavered for a moment, filled with a mix of surprise and recognition. His eyes fell on the object glowing faintly in Dokja's hand, a stone radiating an ethereal light. It was the Spectre Stone. Even as the monsters clawed at him, Dokja's focus never faltered. He knew the truth about the stone and its power, but he was certain Jung-hyuk, despite his knowledge, could not wield it. With a decisive act, Dokja bit into the stone, ignoring the searing pain in his body. As the stone broke, a strange vapor escaped from Dokja's mouth. The mist expanded, forming a dense fog that enveloped him completely. The system's notification confirmed his gamble that illusory prison has been activated. You have become a ghost species. The world around Dokja began to distort. The solid platform beneath his feet wavered, and the shapes of Jung-hyuk and Gil-young blurred into indistinct forms. Their voices calling out to him became muffled echoes in the shifting reality. Dokja became a ghost. As soon as Dokja heard his mother's voice, he realized it was a dream. He tried to resist its pull, but this time it wasn't easy. The floor beneath him shifted, soft like a quagmire, and swallowed him whole. A notification appeared, cold and precise, that due to excessive immersion, the influence of the fourth wall has temporarily weakened. Scenes unfolded before him, indifferent to his will. Blood soaked the living room floor. A man's lifeless body lay still, and a woman stood over it, staring down in silence. Her back was to him, but the weight of the memory was unbearable. Dokja's mind resisted. He couldn't, and he wouldn't relive this. Shaking his head violently, the vivid image broke apart and scattered. The remnants of the memory left him breathless. This was his curse, his damn trauma. He reminded himself that some memories were never meant to resurface. It wasn't just the past clawing at him now. The Spectre Spirit Stone he'd acquired on his way to Chungmuro Station was the cause. When consumed, the item temporarily transformed its user into a ghost species, rendering them invisible to monsters. But the cost was steep. It magnified the traumas buried deep within the mind. Dokja had avoided using it for this very reason, yet here he was. The fourth wall, his most reliable shield, had always kept him grounded. Without it, he would have been consumed by the memories. Others wouldn't have lasted as long. They would have lost their sanity. Now, he could only wait for the effects of the fourth wall to return. Then, a voice broke through. For a fleeting moment, Dokja thought the trauma had shifted to another memory, but this voice wasn't his mother's. It wasn't a product of his own mind. It was unfamiliar. Dokja turned, his body tensing. Standing behind him was a woman. She was someone he didn't recognize. Her appearance was striking. Foreign features, blonde hair, and an air of authority. His eyes locked onto hers. In her left eye, there was an ominous red swirl pulsating with unnatural energy. Her piercing gaze rested on him as she spoke, questioning if he was Jung-hyuk. However, Dokja didn't answer. Instead, he quickly activated his personal skill, Character Profile. The familiar system activated, and the barriers surrounding her mind began to crack. Her mental barrier was formidable, level 6, yet it wasn't enough to block him entirely. The results appeared before him. Her attribute was Prophet and Savior. Dokja immediately recognized the woman before him as Anna Croft, a character from 3 Ways to Survive the Apocalypse. Her presence here, of all times, confirmed his suspicions. Anna Croft had the ability to enter others' consciousness without being bound by spatial limitations. She was the Prophet, a woman who could see fragments of the future and sought to reshape it according to her visions. Her sharp gaze demanded answers, her red swirl eye glowing ominously as her powers sought to penetrate his defenses. Dokja's mind worked quickly, formulating a response, but her skill set made deception nearly impossible. A notification appeared, cold and unwavering. Lie detection level 7 activated. Your words are confirmed as false. Dokja remained composed despite the situation. Her insistence on knowing his identity confirmed something for him. The reduced influence of the fourth wall had allowed her to sense his presence. If his understanding of her abilities was correct, she could only reach him because the fourth wall had weakened momentarily. Still, he tested her, dropping hints that should have clarified his identity. He referenced the ichthyosaur nucleus, a rare and valuable item he had sent her through the auction house. Anna Croft's reaction confirmed his suspicions. Her expression shifted from stern authority to startled disbelief. She realized he was the one who had sent the nucleus, the very resource she had used to implant the archdemon's eyeball into her left left eye. The Archdemon's eyeball, a coveted relic worth a fortune, had augmented Anna's powers, granting her unparalleled insight and influence. But now, it seemed that power was faltering. As the effects of the fourth wall skill slowly returned, Dokja watched Anna Croft's figure begin to blur. Her once intense eyes became unfocused, and the influence of the great demon's eyes that had allowed her to interfere with his consciousness weakened. Her figure gradually faded, disappearing from his sight as the fourth wall reasserted itself. Dokja's mind settled once more into its impenetrable fortress. He waved his hand, a casual gesture of farewell, as her presence vanished completely. The fourth wall skill reasserted its full control. The impenetrable barrier of Dokja's mind returned, shielding him once again. The lingering effects of the illusory prison faded entirely, rendering him immune to its influence. His thoughts raced as he regained clarity. This encounter had taken too long, and time was a resource he could not afford to waste. With his already overwhelming situation, running into Anna Croft only complicated matters further. Concern gnawed at him as he considered the possibilities. How much time had passed? Were his companions safe? Had the third scenario begun? Or worse, were they surrounded by ground rats? The thought of Jung Hyuk crossed his mind, and an uneasy possibility emerged. What if Jung Hyuk had harmed Gil Yong? The anxiety deepened, but before he could spiral further, voices echoed in his head, faint but growing stronger. They pulled him back to reality. The exclusive skill Evil Dispel activated, piercing through the fog, clouding his mind. As his vision cleared, the first face he saw was Senga's, her expression filled with relief. Next to her were Lee Hyun-sung and Hee-won, their worry etched clearly into their features. Dokja scanned his surroundings. The scene before him was catastrophic, a blood-soaked battleground, evidence of the brutal fight they had endured. The relief on his companions' faces suggested they had survived, but this victory felt hollow to him. He inquired about the scenario immediately, his voice steady despite his battered state. Lee Hyun-sung quickly reassured him, explaining that the scenario had ended and they had succeeded. His words carried excitement, but Dokja's response was tempered. He tried to move his body, but the exhaustion weighed heavily on him. The toll of their survival was clear in the chaos surrounding them, and he knew this was far from over. Their relief, while understandable, felt premature. He reminded the group that this was only the first day of the scenario. Survival would demand more from them, and there were 6 more days to endure. His mind quickly calculated, recalling that the previous day had been the 4th. Lee Hyun-sung, noticing his state, insisted that Dokja hadn't slept and needed rest. Checking the time, Lee Hyun-sung informed him it was 8:30 a.m., with only 30 minutes having passed since the scenario ended. Dokja acknowledged that his unconsciousness hadn't lasted long, though the exhaustion in his body told him otherwise. His first thought turned to Gil Yong. He asked where the boy was, but before Hee-won could answer, his eyes already found Lee Jae-hae and Jung Hyuk standing a few steps away, looking down at Gil Yong. The two were in conversation, their voices too low for Dokja to catch the full exchange. Jung Hyuk's expression was unreadable, though the faintest trace of irritation flickered across his face. Gil Yong stood firm, his posture steady despite the imposing presence of the regressor before him. Dokja's mind worked quickly, piecing together what little he could discern. Could it be that Gil Yong had startled Jung Hyuk earlier? And if so, what had happened between them in that moment? Jung Hyuk appeared to offer his companionship to Gil Yong, but the boy responded with quiet resolve and declined the offer. Jung Hyuk pressed further, assuring him that he would grow stronger if he accompanied him, but Gil Yong refused again. For a brief moment, Jung Hyuk's eyes locked with Dokja's. His thoughts lingered on the man he had deemed too fortunate, silently deciding that for now, Dokja would remain alive. Dokja wanted to speak, to break the silence that hung between them, but his body betrayed him. He was drained, unable to muster the energy for even a single word. As the moment stretched, Gil Yong noticed that Dokja had regained consciousness. The boy's swollen eyes, red from crying, filled with relief as he rushed toward Dokja and embraced him tightly. Jung Hyuk, standing nearby, observed the scene with his usual detached demeanor. His mind, however, was far from idle. Plans for the night weighed heavily on him, each step meticulously calculated. There was no time to waste. If he didn't act soon, the opportunity would slip away. Dokja, still weak and barely coherent, briefly felt as though he could sense Jung Hyuk's thoughts. His muddled mind struggled to focus, but the exhaustion was too great. Darkness crept over him and he collapsed to the ground, unconscious once more. Gil Young's voice cracked with panic as he called out to Dokja, shaking him slightly, but Hee-won intervened. She reassured the boy, urging him to let Dokja rest. Gil Young hesitated, his concern palpable, but he reluctantly relented and stepped away, mumbling under his breath. With that, the third day of main scenario was declared complete. Time passed, and Dokja stirred awake to the sound of an unfamiliar voice. Bihyung's cheerful tone rang out, urging him to wake up, while Hee-won noted his return to consciousness with a teasing remark about Lee Hyun-song's thigh. Hyun-song, half asleep nearby, mumbled something incoherent about roll call and an orderly officer, his words a reminder of his military past. Dokja blinked, still groggy. Something about the atmosphere felt strange, as though he were back in the army himself. Bihyung, visibly pleased by Dokja's recovery, greeted him with a laugh and handed something over. Before Dokja could react, a flood of messages began to pour into his mind, each carrying the weight of unseen watchers. The constellation known as the demon-like Judge of Fire expressed sadness over the traumas Dokja had endured. The abyssal black flame dragon, intrigued, showed an interest in Dokja's past. Meanwhile, the secretive plotter wondered silently about the mystery surrounding Dokja's mother. Coins began accumulating in Dokja's account as the constellation sponsored him, their curiosity and sympathy manifesting in tangible form. In total, 1,800 coins were added, a stark reminder of how closely they observed his every move. Dokja reflected quietly, his thoughts heavy with the implications of what had just occurred. It seemed that the constellations had caught a glimpse of his past, a violation of his most guarded memories. His frustration simmered beneath the surface, but there was no time to dwell on it. More messages followed, filling his mind with updates and rewards. The system acknowledged his perseverance throughout the night. He had endured Chungmuro's night without the safety of a green zone. This accomplishment unlocked the achievement titled Never-Ending Dawn and rewarded him with an additional 1,000 coins. His coin balance now totaled 22,650. It was a considerable sum, the culmination of his calculated decisions and careful planning. Dokja allowed himself a brief moment of satisfaction. He had saved enough coins to proceed with his plans. As Dokja gathered his thoughts, Hee-won yawned audibly nearby. She stretched lazily, her tone light as she inquired about the plans for the night. She suggested repeating what they had done the previous night. Dokja dismissed the suggestion immediately. That strategy had been a one-time gamble, and he had no intention of relying on it again. Inwardly, Dokja acknowledged the limitations of his knowledge. The 3 ways to survive the apocalypse hadn't provided any details about the locations of hidden green zones for the 4th day of the scenario. However, his resolve remained unshaken. He announced his decision with calm authority. The 3rd scenario would end today. There was no room for delay or hesitation. Hee-won's surprise was evident as she questioned how they would accomplish such a feat. Dokja's answer was concise and direct. The first step was clear. They would hunt down the landlord. Thanks for watching. Like, share, and subscribe if you enjoyed it. Until next time, happy watching.